There is a specific kind of chosen one that God sends a billionaire's blessing to, and I want to describe that person right now, in detail, because I believe that as I do, something inside you is going to recognize itself in every word. This is a person who has believed for a long time. Not the kind of faith that shows up on good days and disappears when the pressure becomes real. The deep kind. The kind that has been tested in real seasons, in real silence, in the kinds of nights where faith stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like something you simply refuse to set down, even though it is heavy. This is a person who has held a promise in one hand and a difficult reality in the other, sometimes for years, and has refused to let go of either one. They have kept their grip on the calling even when the calling stopped offering anything back. They have shown up again and again for a God who, from where they were standing, seemed to be taking a very long time. This person doesn't usually talk about what they're carrying. They've learned to carry it quietly. They've become skilled at the version of themselves they show the world, the steady one, the faithful one, the one who seems fine. But in the private hours, late at night, in the silence that follows a prayer that felt like it didn't reach the ceiling, a question surfaces. One they have never said out loud to anyone. Is it real? Is it actually for me? Or did I somehow miss it? Chosen one, I am here today to answer that question. Not with motivation, not with a "keep going, it's coming" answer that asks you to simply take my word for it. With the documented pattern of how God has always operated, consistently, repeatedly, without exception, with every single person he ever chose for his largest assignments. And the answer is this: the blessing was never lost, it was never delayed without a purpose, and the scale of what God is preparing to release into your life, in this season, right now, is not what you have been imagining, even in your most hopeful moments. It is larger. What God is sending you is a billionaire's blessing, not because of what you have accumulated, not because of what you have achieved or failed to achieve, not because you have earned it through perfect performance in every chapter, but because of who you are, because of what this wilderness has been building in you during all of this time, and because God's mathematics do not operate within the ceilings that human thinking creates. By the end of this message, you will understand not just that the blessing is coming, you will understand exactly why it has been prepared specifically for you, why it carries your name in the spirit realm right now, why this season, as impossible as it has sometimes felt, has been the precise preparation for what is about to be released. Now, I want to build something with you before we go any further, because the word billionaire carries weight in the human mind, and not all of that weight is useful for what I need to show you today. When most people hear that word, the mind goes immediately to a number, a bank balance, a Forbes list, a measurement. And because most people exist at a significant distance from that measurement, the word does one of two things. Either it activates something in the spirit, a sense of reach, of yes, that is the direction I am going, or it creates a quiet internal resistance. A feeling that wanting this much is either unrealistic or spiritually suspicious. That desiring provision at this scale means something is wrong with the heart asking for it. I think you have felt both of those responses at different points in your life. So let me say something directly. God is not impressed by your modesty about provision. The same God who created the universe from nothing, who parted seas and caused water to flow from solid rock and multiplied what a child was carrying in a basket into enough for thousands, that God does not have a provision budget. He does not weigh your need against available resources and determine what is feasible for someone in your situation. He looks at what He has purposed for your life, and He releases what that purpose requires to be fulfilled. And here is what I need you to hear very carefully. The purpose He designed for your life is not a small one. It was never going to be funded by just enough. It was never going to fit inside modest provision. The assignment God had in mind for you when He called you chosen is one that requires the kind of resources, the kind of reach, the kind of generational impact that the world calls billionaire level. Now, I am not speaking only of a bank account, though I will not put a ceiling on what God can do in the physical world either. But what God calls a billionaire is different from what the world calls one. In the economy of heaven, a billionaire is a person whose life carries enough provision, enough influence, enough access to pour beyond their immediate circle, into their family, into their community, into their generation, into the generations that will come after them. A person through whom others receive, not simply a person who receives. And that is the identity you were created to inhabit. That is why the blessing being prepared for you is not small. It cannot be small and still fulfill the purpose it was designed to accomplish through you and through your life. Now, I want to do something important. I want to sit with the real of what you have been through. Not rush past it to get to the good news. Not put a spiritual bow on top of it before we have genuinely honored what this season has cost you. You have been in a financial waiting season, and it has lasted longer than you expected, longer than you prayed it would, longer than you can easily explain to people who haven't lived it from the inside. I don't know the exact shape of your season. Maybe it looks like provision that has been just enough for years, consistently just enough, never what you know in your spirit it was supposed to look like. Maybe it looks like a breakthrough that almost happened, more than once, that closed before it fully opened. Maybe it looks like watching doors swing wide for people around you while yours have remained shut, and having to do something very quietly difficult, which is to stay genuinely glad for them while carrying your own silence. Maybe it looks like the kind of financial stress nobody sees, the kind you navigate alone because the last thing you want is for your struggle to look like evidence that your faith isn't working. Whatever shape this season has taken for you, I want to say something with everything I have. You have not been forgotten. The silence you have interpreted as God's absence is not absence. The delay you have experienced is not a verdict against you. And the gap between what you believe is coming and what you can currently see is not evidence that the promise was false or that it belonged to someone else. I know that is easy to say. I know it can sound like the kind of comfort offered when there are no real answers available. So, I am not going to leave it there. I am going to show you through every part of this message exactly what is happening in the invisible realm while you are surviving the visible one. But first I need to say one more thing. What you have done during this season, this act of continuing, of holding the calling even when the calling stopped feeling like a calling and started feeling like a weight, that choice is not ordinary. It doesn't feel significant from the inside. When you are in it, it just feels like not quitting. But in the economy of God, that specific choice, to keep going when going made no logical sense, is one of the most spiritually significant acts a person can perform. Not one day of this season has been wasted. Not one prayer that felt like it didn't land. Not one moment of choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Every single part of it has been working. Now, there is something I want to show you. I want to show you that the blessing is not just coming, it is already in motion. It is moving right now in the invisible realm, assembling itself in the places you cannot yet see, approaching the visible in ways that will soon become undeniable. And here is how you begin to see it. There are 7 signs that the billionaire blessing is already in motion in your life. I am going to walk through each one specifically. But before I begin, I need to tell you something about sign number 3. Sign 3 is the one that most chosen ones in a financial wilderness season completely misread. They see it happening in their lives, and they interpret it as evidence of failure, as a warning, as something going in the wrong direction. It is the most powerful confirmation I know of that your breakthrough is near. So when we reach sign 3, I want you to resist the instinct to dismiss it or to reframe it as a problem. Hold it as the gift it actually is. And the 7th sign, the last one, is the one that recontextualizes everything. Everything you have been calling a setback, a delay, a disappointment, a door that should have opened and didn't. The seventh sign makes all of it legible in a completely new way. There are 7 signs that the billionaire blessing is already in motion in your life. Every one of them is real, observable, and already present if you know what to look for. The first sign is what I call divine restlessness. This is not anxiety. That distinction matters, and I want to make it carefully. Anxiety is unsettled at the surface and chaotic underneath. What I am describing is different. This has a settled quality underneath it, even as it is persistent on the surface. It does not spiral. It does not lead to panic. It sits in you like a steady compass, always pointing in a direction you have not fully moved toward yet. What it feels like, practically, is a growing inability to be fully satisfied with what used to feel like enough. A season ago, a certain level of provision would have brought you relief. A certain income, a certain stability, a certain size of life would have felt like something to rest in, or at least to stop pressing against. And now, without anything significant changing on the outside, that same level feels incomplete. Not wrong exactly, just not where the compass is pointing. Like wearing a coat that fit well last winter. It is not ruined, it simply does not fit the person you have grown into. Now, most people interpret this as ingratitude or as greed. Those are the 2 accusations that love to attach themselves to this sign, because if those accusations land, you will suppress the feeling rather than follow it. You will call it a character flaw and manage it rather than recognize it as a message. But this restlessness is not coming from a place of lack in your character. Divine restlessness is God-initiated. Before God expands provision, He expands vision and appetite. He removes your peace from the current container, not because the container is bad, but because what He is preparing cannot land in a space that has made itself permanently comfortable with too little. He makes the current level feel insufficient in order to position you, your attention, and your reach in the direction the blessing is coming from. Joseph, in the pit, could have made his peace with survival. He had water, he was alive, the crisis had passed. But something God had placed in Joseph from the beginning refused to accept the pit as a destination. That restlessness, that interior refusal to settle, was not Joseph being ungrateful for being alive. It was God keeping his face turned toward the palace that was still many years away. If you have noticed in recent months that things which used to feel like enough no longer satisfy the way they did, that is not you drifting from faithfulness. That is God relocating your peace for a specific reason. The restlessness is not a problem. It is a signal. The second sign is a quiet reorganization of the relationships around you. I say quiet intentionally, because in most cases, this does not announce itself with drama. There is usually no confrontation, no single clear event you can point to and say that is when it changed. It tends to happen gradually, almost imperceptibly, with a momentum that seems to have its own direction. Some relationships that used to feel central have become distant. People who were a consistent presence have become occasional. And you may have spent time wondering what happened, replaying conversations, trying to find what you said or did that caused the shift. I want to offer you a different way to read this. God is protective of the infrastructure of a billionaire's blessing. Not every relationship in your life right now is equipped to walk with you into the season that is coming. Not because of those people's worth, not because of their character, but because the next season requires something different, and some of the relationships that were genuinely essential for the wilderness were never designed to sustain the elevation. The people who carry you to your next chapter are not always the people who stay in your next chapter. Joseph's brothers were the mechanism that brought him to Egypt, but they could not walk him into Pharaoh's court. And here is the other half of this sign, the part that is equally important. As some relationships recede, new ones are forming, quietly, in unexpected places. People whose paths are crossing yours with a frequency that feels faintly deliberate. People who see something in you before you've said much. People whose presence opens something in your thinking or your awareness that wasn't open before. Pay attention to what is arriving as much as to what is receding. God is assembling the relational infrastructure of your next season before that season begins. He is positioning the right people into your orbit while the blessing is still in the invisible realm. Because when it arrives in the visible, they need to already be there. The reorganization around you is not loss, it is preparation. Sign 3. The one I told you about. The third sign is an acceleration of ideas, and I want to say what I said I would, which is that this is the sign most likely to be misread, especially during financial pressure. You begin receiving thoughts that feel too large for your current circumstances. Not vague daydreaming, actual, specific ideas, plans with structure, strategies that arrive in your mind already partially assembled, carrying a weight and a clarity that ordinary imagination does not usually produce. Visions of things you could build, or lead, or contribute, that feel significant and real, even while you have no visible evidence that they're achievable from where you currently stand. And here is where the misread almost always happens. You feel the idea, you feel its scale, and immediately the mind does a comparison. It places the size of the idea next to the size of your current resources, your connections, your circumstances, and it renders a verdict. This is not for me. This is for someone further along. This is too much for where I am right now. So the idea gets filed away, or suppressed, or quietly let go in the same private place where everything else in this season has been quietly placed. Let me tell you what that idea actually is. It is a preview. God does not give chosen ones ideas at a billionaire scale to frustrate them. He does not show you something he has no intention of providing the resources to fulfill. Every thought that has arrived in you at that scale, every plan that felt too large, every vision that showed up already carrying its own weight, is a picture of something already in preparation in the invisible realm. The reason the vision arrives before the provision is not a design flaw. It is God's consistent operating pattern across every generation. He sends the picture ahead of the resources because the picture is what keeps the chosen one oriented correctly during the wait. Without the picture, the wait has no direction. Joseph's dream came in his teenage years, long before there was any physical evidence it could be true. Long before the position described in the dream existed. It arrived with no roadmap, no timeline, no explanation of what came between, just a picture. And that picture, carried through every hard chapter that followed, kept Joseph's identity oriented toward the palace even from the floor of the prison. The ideas arriving in you are not fantasies produced by a mind that refuses to be realistic. They are the voice of your assignment, speaking to you from ahead of where you currently stand, calling you forward into what is already being built. If you have dismissed thoughts recently because they felt too large, I want to invite you, gently, to hold them differently from this moment. Not as evidence of delusion, as evidence of scale, as confirmation that what God is preparing for your life is exactly as large as the thought that was sent to describe it. The fourth sign is one you may have been feeling without fully naming. It is compression, a tightening, a sense that everything is getting more constrained, more pressured, more narrow, at exactly the moment you would expect things to be expanding. Maybe it shows up in finances becoming more strained, even as you pray for release. In timing that was supposed to work, not working. In plans that seemed solid, falling apart. In doors that seem to be opening, closing again. In a general sense that your margin is shrinking at the exact moment it should be growing. The natural interpretation is that things are going the wrong direction, that you should pull back, that something is signaling stop. Here is what is actually happening. In the natural world, in biology, in engineering, in everything that grows and releases, compression and expansion are partners. One consistently precedes the other. A seed experiences its most intense pressure in the moments just before it breaks through the soil. A muscle breaks down most significantly in the period just before it rebuilds stronger. A spring is at maximum compression in the instant before it releases. What feels like the pressure of things getting worse is almost always the condition of things preparing to break open. When God is releasing something at a scale that requires an entire life to expand, He allows, and sometimes He specifically orchestrates, a season of compression before that expansion arrives. Not to crush what He has built, but because the expansion that emerges from pressure is structurally different from expansion that arrives casually. It has integrity, it holds its shape, it does not collapse under the weight of what follows it. The financial tightness you are living in right now is not evidence that the blessing is being kept from you. It is sign 4 that the release is near. Now I want you to pause with me for just a moment. Wherever you are, take a breath. Don't answer this out loud, just hold it in the quiet of wherever you are. Of the 4 signs I have described, how many are active in your life right now? The restlessness that won't let you fully settle, the quiet relational reorganization happening around you, the ideas arriving that feel too large, the compression you have been living inside. Hold that number. Because here is what that number means. Every sign that is active in your life is not a measurement of how hard your season is. It is a marker, a specific, documented indicator that a billionaire's blessing is already moving through the invisible realm toward the visible one, assembling itself, positioning itself, preparing for a release that the visible world has not yet registered. Before I show you the final 3 signs, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. There is a lot more in this message than 7 signs, and if you are able to stay, I'm asking you to watch all the way through. Here is what this message holds from this point forward. You are going to understand exactly why your wilderness season has lasted the length it has, not as a spiritual platitude, as a specific, documented pattern with 3 clear reasons that will permanently change how you see every single day of it. You are going to hear about a discovery from one of the most credentialed neuroscience researchers working in this field, a finding about what actually happens in the brains of people who step fully into their breakthrough season versus those who stop right at the edge of it. And I believe what you hear will reach something in you that words alone may not be able to access. You are going to receive a framework for God's economy that will permanently expand what you believe is possible for your life. And at the very end of this message, I am going to speak a declaration over you that I believe you have been needing to hear for longer than you may realize. Every part of what follows builds on what we have already walked through together. Stay with it all the way through. The remaining 3 signs are next, and the last one, sign 7, is the one that changes how you read your entire story. Let's continue. We ended at 4 signs, and I want you to carry those 4 into what comes next, because signs 5, 6, and 7 do not stand alone. They confirm each other. They confirm the 4 before them. Together, all 7 form a picture of a season that is not what it appears to be from the outside. Let's finish the signs. The 5th sign is unexpected alignment. Now this sign is different in character from the first 4. The restlessness is internal. The relational reorganization is significant and noticeable. The ideas are large. The compression is felt in the body. But sign 5 is quieter than all of them. Small, almost dismissible. It is the appearance of small, unexplained doors opening in areas of your life that seem unrelated to the specific area you've been waiting on. A connection forming somewhere you were not looking. An opportunity surfacing in a direction you had not pursued. A conversation that opens something you didn't know was closed. A door that has no logical reason to be opening anyway. None of these look like the breakthrough. They don't announce themselves as the billionaire blessing arriving. They look like small encouragements, like minor coincidences, like isolated kindnesses from life. Here is what they actually are. God almost never reveals the full architecture of a breakthrough in a single moment. He reveals it incrementally, each piece connected to the piece before it and pointing toward the piece after it. And the small, unexpected alignments that appear in the season before a major release are the advance markers. They are God's way of showing a chosen one that movement has begun in the invisible realm through small visible evidence before the large visible evidence is ready. Joseph, in prison, interpreted a dream for Pharaoh's cupbearer. The cupbearer was restored. He promised to remember Joseph before Pharaoh, and then he forgot. For 2 years. From Joseph's perspective in that prison, that connection opened a door and then closed it. It looked like a small alignment that led nowhere. It appeared to be encouragement that didn't deliver. But in the architecture of what God was building, that forgotten conversation was not a failed opening, it was a hinge. 2 years later, the moment Pharaoh needed a dream interpreter, the cupbearer remembered. And that remembering was the single turning point on which Joseph's entire elevation rested. The small, unexpected alignments in your life right now are not consolation prizes, they are hinges. Each one is connected to a larger movement that you cannot yet see from where you are standing. Pay attention to the small doors. They are not small. The sixth sign is one that may be happening in you so quietly that you haven't fully named it yet. It is financial clarity without financial change. The numbers in your situation have not significantly shifted. The circumstances on paper look similar to what they looked like before. But something has changed in how you see it all. You are beginning to see possibility where you previously saw only problem, strategy where you used to see only limitation. You find yourself having specific thoughts about resources and approaches and directions that carry a clarity and a sharpness that was not present before. Numbers are starting to make sense in new ways. Paths that never occurred to you are beginning to occur to you. From the outside, nothing has changed. From the inside, something is coming into focus. Here is why this matters. Provision that arrives at a scale the receiver is not prepared to think clearly about tends to be provision that doesn't stay. The capacity to steward a billionaire's blessing is not just a character capacity. It is also a thinking capacity, a clarity about resources and strategy and direction that has to be in place before the provision fills it. God does not release the resources into hands that have no framework for what to do with them. He develops the framework first, and the financial clarity that is quietly sharpening in you right now, even while the external circumstances are still unchanged, is God building the stewardship architecture in you before He fills it. If you have noticed recently a mental sharpness about your financial situation that wasn't there a year ago, a sense of seeing more clearly, of ideas about your own situation becoming more structured and specific, that is not wishful thinking. That is preparation, and it is sign 6. And now, sign 7, the one I said would change how you read your entire story. The 7th sign is a specific kind of longing. It is a pull toward provision that feels holy rather than hungry. There is an experience that chosen ones have in the season just before their breakthrough that I want to describe very carefully, because I need you to recognize it for what it is, rather than for what culture may have taught you to call it. It is a desire for abundance that does not feel like personal greed. It feels more like a calling than a craving. When you imagine having the resources to actually do what you know you were placed here to do, when you imagine having access to the provision your assignment requires, something in you resonates from a place of service rather than a place of want. From a place of finally being able to match the outer reality to the inner assignment. You want it not only for yourself. You want it because of what you know it would allow you to give to your family, to your community, to the people who are waiting on what God placed in you to manifest. There is a weight to this longing that isn't about accumulation. It's about completion. About finally being able to carry out the thing that has been waiting inside you all along. And here is where this sign has been so consistently misread. In spaces where faith and finances have a complicated relationship, where believers are sometimes taught that the desire for significant provision is inherently a spiritual problem, many chosen ones have learned to be suspicious of this longing in themselves. They suppress it. They frame it as greed before anyone else can. They make themselves small about the desire for the resources their calling requires. And in doing that, in suppressing and shaming this longing, they have been unknowingly resisting one of the clearest signals that their season is changing. Now I want to show you what I told you this sign would do. I told you sign 7 would recontextualize everything you've been calling a setback. Here is how. Every delay you have endured, every provision that didn't arrive when you expected it, every year of waiting in a season that seemed to stand completely still, all of it, every day of it, has been working on the purity of this longing. The person who receives breakthrough early tends to want for reasons that are still primarily personal. The person who is formed through the waiting tends to want for reasons that have been refined by the waiting itself into something the early receiver does not yet carry. God releases a billionaire-level blessing when he sees that the wanting in a chosen one has been purified to the point where it is no longer primarily about the self. And here is the thing about your delays, your closed doors, your long seasons of just enough. They have not been keeping you from the blessing. They have been producing in you the quality of wanting that makes the blessing safe to release. The longing you carry, the one that feels too large to admit and too purposeful to be called greed, is not a character flaw. It is the 7th sign, and I hope you carry it differently now. 7 signs, hold them all together. The divine restlessness, the relational reorganization, the oversized ideas arriving, the compression pressing against your margins, the small, unexpected alignments, the financial clarity sharpening inside you, and the holy longing that has survived every delay intact. These are not random symptoms of a difficult life. They are the documented markers of a chosen one in the final formation stages before their breakthrough. Every single one of them is a confirmation, not of how far you are from the blessing, but of how close you are to it. You are not in the middle of your wilderness. You are at the edge of it. Now, I want to take you deeper. I want to show you why the wilderness existed at all. Because I think if you truly understand this, something will shift permanently in how you see this season. Not as something to survive and leave behind as fast as possible, as something that was working for you all along, in ways you could not see from inside it. There is a pattern across the lives of every chosen one God has elevated to significant provision and influence, and the pattern is consistent enough that it can be taught. The larger the assignment, the longer the formation. The larger the blessing, the deeper the preparation. The higher the elevation, the more thorough the wilderness. This is not cruelty. It is architecture. There are 3 specific reasons why God creates a financial wilderness for the chosen ones He has called to a billionaire-level assignment. I am going to walk through each one carefully, because each one is going to show you something about what has been happening in you during what looked like waiting. And when I finish the 3 reasons, I want to show you something even more specific. There are 5 character traits that are formed only in this kind of wilderness, and only in this kind of wilderness. Traits that cannot be produced in a comfortable season, no matter how devoted the person is. I am going to show you all 5, and I'm going to show you where you are in the formation of each one right now. Because only one of those 5 traits is fully formed in most chosen ones who are at the edge of their season. The other 4 are still in process, and by the time I show you all 5, you will understand not just why the blessing has taken this long to arrive, but exactly what it has been waiting for. The first reason God creates a financial wilderness for the chosen ones he intends to elevate furthest is this: character capacity must grow to match blessing capacity. This is not a metaphor, it is a structural truth about how significant provision works in human lives. When resources arrive at a scale that significantly exceeds the character of the person receiving them, one of two things consistently happens. The resources are lost, or the person is diminished by them. This is not a spiritual observation only, it is observable, documented, repeated. We have all seen it in some form. A person receives more than they were built to hold at that point in their development, and the resources either move through them quickly or change them in ways that do not lead anywhere they actually wanted to go. The billionaire's blessing that God is preparing for a chosen one is not a scale that can be carried by the person who entered the wilderness. It requires someone who has been specifically constructed during the waiting, someone whose internal frame has been built to hold the weight of what is coming. Think about it this way. You would not hand a precision instrument to hands that had not been developed for it, not because the instrument is too valuable to be received, but because what that instrument can do and what those hands can currently manage are not yet aligned. The instrument needs hands that have been formed through a slower, harder process of development. The financial wilderness is the formation of your hands, not in a mechanical sense, in the character sense. The patience being built in you through years of not enough, the perspective being formed through having to navigate with less than you needed, the wisdom being refined through circumstances that required you to think carefully about every decision, the humility being shaped through seasons of consistent dependence on a source beyond your own ability to provide. None of that could have been produced quickly. None of it could have been produced in comfort. It could only be produced here, in this exact wilderness, over this exact length of time. The first reason is that the person who will carry the blessing had to be built first, and you have been under construction this entire season. The second reason is this: only those who have genuinely lacked can understand provision as sacred rather than entitled. This is perhaps the most quietly powerful principle in the entire theology of wealth and blessing. When provision is always adequate, when there has never been a season of genuine not enough, something very subtle tends to happen over time. Resources become routine, they become expected. Not through any character flaw, but simply because the mind and heart adapt to normal. And when provision is normal, it is no longer experienced as gift. The chosen one who is meant to carry a billionaire's blessing into the world is not meant to manage it as a business function or accumulate it as a personal achievement. They are meant to steward it, with gratitude at its root, with generosity as its natural instinct, with a bone-level understanding that what has been given is given and not earned. That understanding cannot be taught in a classroom or downloaded from a sermon. It can only be lived into. The person who has sat at the table of not enough, who has looked honestly at their situation and still said, "I trust the source," who has had to hold their hands open when everything in them wanted to close them in self-protection, that person knows something about provision that no amount of instruction can replicate. They know it is gift, not because they have been told it is, because they have lived through the difference between its absence and its presence. And when the billionaire's blessing arrives in the hands of a person who knows that difference at that depth, it is held with the right posture, not clutched, not displayed, not protected from the people it was designed to reach, but stewarded, passed through, multiplied in the direction of those who need it. The financial wilderness is forming in you the interior posture that makes the blessing do what it was designed to do. The second reason for your season is that God is building into you a relationship to provision that only the wilderness can create. And the third reason is one that requires some honesty. There are things God will not allow to occupy the position in a chosen one's life that He alone holds. And provision at a billionaire scale has more potential to quietly occupy that position than almost anything else a person can receive. This is not about God being possessive in a small sense. This is about God understanding something about human nature that we often do not understand about ourselves. We do not know in advance what we will worship when we receive more than enough. We believe we will remain grateful. We believe we will stay humble, that the identity we carried faithfully through the wilderness will be the identity we carry in the abundance. We believe this sincerely, and most of us believe it correctly about our intentions. But God knows that the transition from scarcity to abundance is one of the most spiritually significant passages a human being can walk through. And He knows that some people who were genuinely devoted in the wilderness, have been quietly lost to a subtler devotion in the abundance, not to obvious idolatry, to something quieter, the slow replacement of dependence on God with dependence on provision. The length of the wilderness season is, in part, God calibrating that dependence, drawing it back again and again through seasons where the provision is not enough to its proper source, not to the outcome, not to the gift, to the giver. And every chosen one who has walked through a long financial wilderness and emerged with their devotion intact, with their trust in the source undiluted by bitterness or disappointment, carries something into the abundance that a shortcut could never have produced. They know that the blessing is not the blesser, and the blesser, who sees that understanding fully in place, releases the blessing without reservation, because he knows what it will never replace. The third reason for your wilderness is that God is making absolutely sure that when the provision arrives, He remains the center of the story. And you have been proving that through every hard day of this season. Let me tell you about a man I want you to hear about. He described his season as 12 years of financial wilderness. Not poverty, he was careful to say that. He had always had what he needed, but he had been under the same financial ceiling for over a decade. Just enough to manage, never enough to breathe. He used to joke about it the way people joke about things that are actually too heavy to say directly. He would say that God had excellent timing, just not his timing. He had prayed. He had given generously from what little he had. He had believed, or tried to believe, through all the years that belief was the hardest to maintain. He told me about a Wednesday afternoon, specifically. An ordinary Wednesday afternoon, the kind that carried its own weight in that season, the weight of another day that looked exactly like the one before it. Someone he had met briefly once, more than a year earlier, a connection so passing he had nearly forgotten it entirely, reached out that morning, asked if they could talk. He agreed mostly out of politeness, without expecting anything significant. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. In those 45 minutes, a door opened that he had never seen, never tried, and never known existed. Not a metaphor, a real, specific opportunity that connected directly, through a series of steps that followed, to the financial breakthrough he had been carrying in prayer for 12 years. He said later, "I had no idea that was going to be that afternoon. If I had known, I would have prepared differently. I would have been different. I think now that was exactly why I wasn't told. The door opened when I was just being myself, because that's what it needed to open to." The breakthrough arrival in a chosen one's life almost never looks like a breakthrough when it's beginning. It looks like a Wednesday afternoon, a conversation that almost didn't happen, a connection that was nearly forgotten, a door that had no reason to open. That is how the billionaire blessing tends to arrive. Not announced, not scheduled, just suddenly present in the infrastructure that was being built the entire time you thought nothing was moving. Now, I want to show you the 5 things that were being built in that man during his 12 years. I want to show you what was forming in him during all that time, when it appeared from the outside that nothing was happening. There are 5 character traits that God specifically forms in a chosen one during a financial wilderness. These are not general virtues. They are specific, structural qualities required by the stewardship of a billionaire's blessing. And each one is built only here, in this season, in this kind of pressure, in this specific length of waiting. The first of the 5 is integrity under pressure. This is the quality of remaining who you said you are, and who God built you to be, in the moments when no one visible is watching, and compromise would be both invisible and understandable. Not integrity in easy conditions. Anyone can maintain integrity when maintaining it costs nothing. The integrity I'm speaking of is the kind that holds when the situation has provided a genuine justification for the exception, when the pressure is real, when the need is urgent enough that bending the standard would make logical sense, when no one would judge you for it, and you know that. The financial wilderness creates the conditions for this kind of integrity at a frequency that no comfortable season can replicate. Because in the wilderness you are pressed consistently in the exact places where a person's actual character reveals itself. Every time you have chosen honesty when a small dishonesty would have helped and gone unnoticed. Every time you have kept your word when breaking it would have been easier and no one would have faulted you. Every time you have held a standard in your relationships or your finances or your character when the circumstances gave you room to do otherwise, you have been building the trait that is most essential to managing what God is preparing to release. The person who carries a billionaire's blessing is a person who has been observed in the invisible realm, choosing correctly when the stakes were personal and the audience was small. Of the 5 traits, this one tends to be the most developed in chosen ones who are at the edge of their season. You've been building it every day. You've been in this. Integrity under pressure. It is in you, more deeply than you know. The second trait is gratitude for small provision. I want to say something before I explain this, because I know how it can land. This is not a lesson about being content with less than God promised. It is about something more nuanced than that. Gratitude in abundance is not remarkable. When there is more than enough, thankfulness arrives naturally. What requires genuine formation is the capacity to receive a small provision and recognize it as a real provision. To hold the daily sufficiency as a gift. To not let the gap between what is here and what is coming drain all the meaning from what is here. This is harder than it sounds, especially for a chosen one who knows what was promised and can feel the distance between the promise and the present. The chosen one who can do this, who can genuinely hold 2 things at once, the gratitude for the small thing that is here and the faith in the large thing that is coming, without the first collapsing into bitterness and the second hardening into entitlement, is developing a capacity that will shape how they hold the billionaire's blessing when it arrives. This trait is still forming in most chosen ones at your stage, not fully there yet, and that is not a failure. That is honesty. The wilderness is still working on it. Here is a quiet thing I want to leave with you. In the last few days, was there a moment, however small, where you received something and your immediate response was gratitude rather than awareness of what was still missing? Hold that moment, however brief it was. That was the trait forming. The third trait is generosity from scarcity. This is the hardest one. I want to name that before I explain it, so you hear what follows without the weight of condemnation. When resources are tight, the natural instinct is to protect what little you have. This is not a spiritual failure, it is survival instinct, and it is understandable, and it is human. When you genuinely do not have enough, the impulse to hold tightly to what is there is the instinct of a person trying to keep themselves and the people they love from falling further. But in the life of a chosen one being formed for a billionaire's assignment, that survival instinct is being consistently challenged by a pattern that almost everyone on this road will recognize. The opportunity to give, in exactly the season when giving feels most costly, arrives with a frequency that seems disproportionate to the circumstances. And in those moments, in those specific recurring moments where something asks to be released from a tight hand, something is being formed. Not through guilt, not through obligation. Through the quiet invitation of a source that is asking the chosen one to demonstrate in small acts what they actually believe about where provision comes from. When you give from scarcity, you are demonstrating something to yourself and to the God who sees clearly that you have not confused the stream with the source, that you know the provision is not coming from your management of the small amount you have, that you trust the source enough to open your hand even when opening it feels dangerous. That demonstration is not small. It is one of the most powerful acts of formation in the entire wilderness season. This trait is still in process in most chosen ones at your stage, and the fact that it is still being worked on is not a mark against you. It means the formation is thorough. It means God is building something that will hold. If this were the full message, if this were everything, it would have been enough. You now carry the 7 signs of your blessing already in motion. You understand the 3 reasons your wilderness has lasted the length it has. You have seen 3 of the 5 traits being built in you right now, today, in the season that has felt like nothing but waiting, but has been producing something in you that cannot be produced any other way. That alone would have changed how you see your season. But there is something much larger I haven't told you yet. There is a truth coming in the next part of this message that will not just change how you see your season. It will change how you see the entire economy you have been calculating your life inside of. Because here is what I need to tell you. You have been using the wrong calculator. Human mathematics will never be able to show you what is actually happening in your financial story. Not because the numbers are wrong, but because the economy those numbers belong to is not the economy God is operating in on your behalf. What I am about to show you is God's economy. The actual financial framework of the kingdom. The one Joseph operated within. The one Solomon embodied. The one that produced the billionaire level provision in every single chosen one across recorded history who ever stood where you are standing. And when you see it, the story you have been telling yourself about your financial season is going to change completely. Stay with me. The revelation that makes everything else make sense is still ahead. I made a promise at the end of what we just walked through together. I promised you 5 character traits, and I showed you 3 of them. Integrity under pressure, gratitude for small provision, generosity from scarcity. I said the last 2 were still coming, and I need to show them to you before we go any further, because they are the 2 that are most directly connected to the door opening. They are the ones that, when they reach a specific level of formation, signal to God that the chosen one is ready for what has been prepared. So before we talk about the economy, before we talk about the calculator you have been using that cannot show you what is actually happening, I need you to see trait 4 and trait 5. Because when you understand all 5 and where you are in the formation of each one, the timing of your blessing will start to make a different kind of sense. The 4th trait is vision that outpaces circumstance. This is the capacity to hold a clear picture of what is coming, even when what is visible right now contains no evidence that it is real. Now I want to be careful here, because there is a version of this that is simply denial, a refusal to acknowledge reality in favor of a more comfortable story. That is not what I am describing. The vision I am talking about coexists with a clear and honest view of the present situation. It does not pretend the current circumstances are not real. It simply refuses to allow those circumstances to be the final word on what is possible. Joseph could see the pit. He was in it. He could see the prison. He was locked in it. He never pretended these were not his circumstances. But something in him, a picture God had placed in him through that dream in his teenage years, refused to let the current location determine the final destination. That picture and that prison coexisted in him for over a decade. This is what vision that outpaces circumstance actually looks like from the inside. Not the absence of awareness about how things are. The presence of an image of how things will be, held quietly but firmly, even when the visible world provides no support for it. For a chosen one in a financial wilderness, this trait develops in a specific way. It tends to begin as hope, something fluid and feeling-based, something that rises and falls with the emotional temperature of the day. And through years of pressure, through the consistent discipline of holding the picture when the day makes holding it hard, it slowly becomes something more structural. Something that does not require the right feeling to remain in place. Something that is simply there, like a compass bearing, independent of the weather. This is vision becoming settled. And it is the difference between someone who hopes the blessing is coming and someone who knows it. If you have noticed that your picture of the future has become less dependent on your daily circumstances to stay clear, if the vision is beginning to feel more solid and less emotional, that is trait 4 in formation. And it is one of the signs that you are further along in the process than you may have realized. Vision that outpaces circumstance, still forming. And the fact that it is forming is evidence of how far the process has come. And the 5th trait is the one I want to spend the most time on, because it is both the most profound and the earliest in development for most chosen ones at your stage. It is sovereignty consciousness. Let me explain what this means in plain terms. It is the settled awareness that what you have is not yours, not in a shame-based sense, not in a you don't deserve it sense, in the most liberating sense possible. Sovereignty consciousness is the experiential understanding that you are not the owner of what God places in your hands. You are the steward, the caretaker, the person through whom provision flows toward its actual destination. This is a distinction that sounds simple when spoken and is genuinely transformative when lived, because it changes everything about how you hold resources, how you make decisions about them, how you relate to both their presence and their absence. When you believe you are the owner of your provision, its scarcity feels like a personal verdict, like something was taken from you or withheld from you. Its arrival feels like personal achievement, and its presence can become something you protect because it is yours, and losing it would feel like losing part of yourself. When you understand you are the steward, the entire relationship changes. Scarcity is not a verdict. It is a season of the stewardship. Abundance is not personal achievement. It is the assignment expanding to match the need it was sent to address. And provision is held with an open hand, because the hand was never the source of it. God does not release a billionaire's blessing into hands that are closed around the provision they currently have. The closing is the signal that ownership has been misidentified. The open hand, even when what it holds is small, is the signal that the stewardship posture is in place. This is the most important trait of the 5, and I want to be fully honest with you. This is also the one that is in the earliest stages of formation in most chosen ones who are in the season you are in. Not because they have failed, not because their faith is insufficient, but because this particular understanding can only be built over time through many cycles of holding and releasing, of having and not having, of trusting the source in both conditions. It takes the full length of the wilderness to build it properly. And if you have noticed in recent months or years a gradual loosening of your grip, a slow, sometimes uncomfortable shift from my resources to the resources I steward, a growing sense that what you have is held in trust rather than possessed outright. Even if that shift has been partial and uneven and accompanied by resistance, that is sovereignty consciousness forming. And when it reaches a certain depth, when God observes it operating not just in prayer but in real decisions about real resources, something shifts in what he is willing to release. Because the hand that has learned to hold with open fingers is the hand he can fill without reservation. 5 traits, all 5 of them building in you right now, today, in this season, in ways that will produce something in you that no comfortable chapter could have created. Integrity under pressure, gratitude for small provision, generosity from scarcity, vision that outpaces circumstance, sovereignty, consciousness. Now you understand not just the 3 reasons for your wilderness. You understand what the wilderness has been specifically constructing in you during all of this time. And now I want to show you the economy. I told you at the close of the last part that you have been using the wrong calculator. I want to unpack what I mean by that. When a chosen one tries to understand their financial situation, tries to make sense of where they are versus where the promise has pointed, they almost always use the same framework. The human framework, the one that observes inputs, outputs, effort, timing, and logical cause and effect. The one that says, if you work this hard for this long with this level of faith and this degree of obedience, the result should look something like this by now. And then the result does not look like that, and the calculator produces an answer that does not match the promise. So the chosen one concludes one of several things: that they have miscalculated their own effort, that there is a flaw in their obedience they have not yet identified, that the timeline was wrong, that the promise was perhaps never as large as they believed, that maybe they are not who they thought they were in the story God was writing. Every one of those conclusions is produced by the wrong calculator. The human framework cannot produce the right answer when applied to the economy God is operating in on your behalf. Not because God is mysterious and unknowable, but because the rules of his economy are genuinely different from the rules of human economy, different in structure, different in logic, different in what determines timing and scale and outcome. And once you see those differences clearly, once you actually understand the framework God is working within, the story of your financial season changes completely. Not because the facts change, the facts are the same, but the meaning of those facts changes entirely. Let me show you 4 specific ways that God's economy differs from the human economy you have been calculating inside. The first contrast is this: human economy is linear, God's economy is sudden. In human economy, progress is proportional to effort over time. You put in consistent work over a consistent period, and you receive consistent, measurable progress. The line goes up as the inputs continue. And if the inputs are sufficient and sustained, the progress arrives on a schedule that can be reasonably anticipated. That is how human economy works. God does not operate on that model for his chosen ones. In the economy of God, there are seasons of preparation where visible progress is not the point, where the work being done is interior work, character work, formation work, the kind that produces no external evidence of its activity. And then, at a specific moment that God determines based on criteria that have nothing to do with the clock on the wall or the calendar on the door, the visible shifts all at once, not incrementally, not proportionally to the effort that preceded it, suddenly. This is the pattern the word suddenly describes across Scripture. It does not mean without preparation. It means without the gradual, visible, sequential build-up that human economy would require. The release point in God's economy arrives in a moment. And what that moment releases is the accumulated weight of everything that was being built in the invisible season that preceded it. Joseph did not gradually gain more responsibility in Egypt. He was in prison one day and governing a nation the next. The shift was not proportional to observable prior progress. It was sudden, because God's economy does not release provision gradually when the moment is right. It releases it completely. If your financial situation looks almost exactly the same today as it did a year ago, that is not evidence that nothing has been happening. In the economy you are actually inside. Sameness on the surface is entirely compatible with significant preparation in the invisible, and the sudden release, when it comes, will look disproportionate to everything that visibly preceded it. That is not an accident. That is by design. In God's economy, preparation does not look like progress, and breakthrough does not look like gradual improvement. It looks like suddenly. The second contrast: human economy is proportional to effort. God's economy is proportional to purpose. In human economy, the scale of outcome is connected to the scale of input. You receive in rough proportion to what you put in. More effort, more skill, more time, more investment, more outcome. God does not calculate provision by measuring what you put in. He calculates it by measuring what the purpose of your life requires. This is one of the most important sentences in this entire message. I want you to sit with it for a moment. God does not give you what you have earned. He gives you what His purpose for your life requires to be fulfilled. If your assignment requires provision at a certain scale to accomplish what it was designed to accomplish, God will release that scale of provision, not because you earned it through perfect performance in every chapter, but because the assignment requires it and the steward has been prepared to carry it. This is why the billionaire's blessing is not a reward, it is a deployment. It is God releasing the resources an assignment requires into the hands of the person He has prepared to steward them. And the scale of your assignment is not small. We established that at the beginning of this message. The purpose God had in mind for your life when He called you chosen is one that requires resources, influence, and reach at a level that the world calls billionaire. Not because you are the most qualified person on earth, not because your performance has been flawless, but because that is the scale of what He designed for your life, and the economy He operates in releases provision to match the purpose, not to reward the effort. This changes everything about how you should read your situation. The third contrast. Human economy is competitive. God's economy is connective. In human economy, resources are limited. What one person receives, another cannot. Progress is at least in part dependent on occupying a position ahead of others in the same pursuit. The existence of other people achieving means there is potentially less for you. The scarcity model is the foundation of human economy. God does not operate in scarcity. When God blesses one chosen one, He is not reducing what is available for another. The provision in His economy is not drawn from a fixed supply that depletes with each release. He is the source, and the source is not diminished by what it gives. More than that, in God's economy, the blessing of one chosen one is typically designed to flow through them to others. Joseph's provision was not just for Joseph. It fed an entire region, including the family that had betrayed him. Solomon's wealth was not a private accumulation. It became the demonstration of God's faithfulness to an entire generation. Abraham's blessing was explicitly structured as a channel, not a container. Through you, all nations will be blessed. The blessing moved through him toward a reach that extended far beyond his personal circumstances. The billionaire's blessing coming toward you is not a competition you need to win over others. It is a channel you need to be prepared to carry, and the preparation is not about defeating anyone or outperforming anyone. It is about being built into the kind of person through whom provision can move at the scale the purpose requires. The fourth contrast. Human economy is measured by accumulation. God's economy is measured by transformation. In human economy, financial success is defined by what you have, what sits in your account, what your name is attached to, what your net worth calculates out to. The measure is what you hold. God measures differently. In His economy, provision is successful when it produces transformation, in the people who receive it, in the communities it reaches, in the generations it touches. The measure is not what the chosen one holds. It is what the chosen one's stewardship changes. This is why two people can receive identical amounts, and only one of them is operating in a billionaire's blessing. Because the one who is transforms everything, the provision touches, and the one who is not simply accumulates. The billionaire you are called to be is not defined by a number. It is defined by the scope of what your provision changes, and the formation of all 5 traits, everything the wilderness has been building in you, has been constructing specifically the interior capacity to carry provision in the way that produces transformation rather than accumulation. God's economy is not what you have, it is what your life changes, and yours is about to change a great deal. Now, remember what I told you about Joseph at the beginning of this message, that he rose to control the economy of Egypt. That was the seed. What I am about to show you is the tree. I want to take you through three of the most documented cases in all of recorded scripture of God's economy operating at a billionaire scale, not to impress you with history, but because the pattern in these three lives is the same pattern that is operating in yours right now, the same economy, the same framework, the same sequence. And when you see the pattern clearly, something in you is going to recognize it, not as a story about people who lived a long time ago, as a blueprint for what is happening in your life in real time. Joseph, the most detailed financial miracle in all of Scripture. Joseph is thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold as a slave, falsely accused, imprisoned, forgotten. For over a decade, every external circumstance points toward permanent insignificance. There is no visible evidence at any point in the 13 years between the dream and the throne that anything is moving in the right direction. And then Pharaoh has a dream. 2 years after the cupbearer forgot his promise. 2 years of additional waiting after what looked like the opening had appeared and then closed. 2 years of more of the same. And then a king who controls the most powerful empire in the known world wakes in the night, disturbed by an image he cannot interpret, and the cupbearer finally remembers. Joseph is brought from the prison to the palace, not gradually, not in stages, but in a single morning, and in the space of one conversation, he goes from prisoner to second in command of the most powerful nation in the world. He does not receive a modest improvement in his situation, he receives governance. In terms of the economy of his era, this is a billionaire-level assignment in the most literal possible sense. He controls the food supply of an entire region. He manages the accumulated resources of the most powerful empire in the known world. Nations come to him for provision. What did the 13 years produce in Joseph that made this possible? Look at the 5 traits. Integrity under pressure. Joseph maintained his character in Potiphar's house. He maintained it in prison. He did not compromise when compromising would have benefited him. Gratitude for small provision. The text shows Joseph performing his function faithfully in every circumstance, whether that circumstance was a house, a prison, or a palace. He was present in the small. Generosity from scarcity. In prison, Joseph interpreted dreams for 2 men and asked nothing in return. He gave from a place of nothing. Vision that outpaces circumstance. The dream never left him. Through the pit and the prison and the forgotten promise, the picture held. Sovereignty consciousness. When Joseph finally stood before his brothers who had betrayed him, when he had every resource and every authority and every reason to act as an owner, he said, "It was not you who sent me here, but God." He knew the provision was not his. He was the instrument. All 5 traits, fully formed, across 13 years. And when the 5th one reached its completion, the door opened the same morning. Solomon. Scripture says something about Solomon that it says about no other person in the entire biblical record. It says he surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. Not most kings, all kings. This is the only explicit billionaire-level endorsement in the sacred text. A direct statement that the provision Solomon carried exceeded that of every other person of comparable position in his generation. And how did it arrive? God appeared to Solomon and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." And Solomon, the son of a shepherd who became a warrior king, the inheritor of a kingdom built in blood and wilderness, asked not for riches, not for military victory, not for the elimination of his enemies. He asked for wisdom, for the capacity to govern well, for the ability to serve the purpose his position required. And God said, "Because you asked for this, and not for personal provision, I will give you what you asked, and I will also give you what you didn't ask, riches and honor, such that no king in any generation will be your equal. Sovereignty, consciousness." That is what Solomon's ask demonstrated. Not, "Give me what I want, give me what the assignment requires," and the provision matched the posture. Abraham. The covenant is the oldest and most far-reaching of the 3. God says to Abraham, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and through you all the families of the earth will be blessed." Look at the scale of that promise. Not just Abraham, not just his children, not just his nation. All families of the earth. This is not personal provision. This is provision so large that it flows beyond any individual's life into the reach of every human generation that follows. A billionaire's blessing, in the most literal and expansive possible meaning of that phrase. And what preceded it? Abraham left his home and his family and his security at the instruction of a God he had only just begun to know, with no specific destination provided, no timeline given, no detailed roadmap offered. He walked into a wilderness not because he understood the route, but because he trusted the source. He carried the promise for decades, through seasons of waiting so extended that he and his wife laughed at the impossibility of it, through moments of very human fear and failure and doubt, through a test that asked him to release the very thing the promise had produced. And through all of it, his grip on the source was slowly, imperfectly, genuinely loosening from self-reliance toward dependence, sovereignty, consciousness, the open hand. When God observed that the hand was open enough, the full blessing was released, not just for Abraham, for all nations. Joseph, Solomon, Abraham, 3 different eras, 3 very different stories on the surface, but look at what is identical in all 3. Every one of them carried a promise at a billionaire scale. Every one of them went through a significant formation season before the promise materialized. Every one of them had the 5 traits specifically built by the specific conditions of their specific wilderness. And every one of them, at the precise moment God determined that the character matched the promise, stepped from the formation season into the fulfillment in a way that was not gradual, not proportional to visible effort, and not predictable from the outside, suddenly, completely, at a scale that looked disproportionate to everything that came before it. That is not coincidence. That is pattern. That is the economy of God operating in a consistent, documented, repeated sequence. And it is the same economy operating in your life right now. I told you there were 3 variables that determine the timing and scale of the billionaire's blessing in the life of a chosen one. I have been building toward this. Every part of what we have covered together has been preparing you to receive this. The 3 variables are character capacity, vision, scope, and surrender depth. And together, they form an equation that explains why the blessing arrives, when it arrives, at the scale it arrives, and not before. Let me explain each one, because understanding them gives you something you may have been missing for a long time, not just a feeling of hope. A framework for understanding where you actually are in the process. Character capacity is the first variable, and we have spent significant time on it through the 5 traits. It is the measure of how much the interior of the person can hold before what is placed in their hands either destroys them or flows away from them. A blessing that exceeds the character capacity of its recipient does not stay. It does not do what it was sent to do. The character has to be built to match what the blessing requires it to carry. Vision scope is the second variable. It is the measure of how large the chosen one's picture is, not how large they hope the blessing will be. How large they genuinely, in their deep interior, believe it can be and believe it is meant to be for their specific life and purpose. This is why the ideas arriving in you, the thoughts that feel too large, are not to be dismissed. They are not wishful excess. They are the vision calibrating itself to the actual scope of the assignment. And the vision has to be that large before the provision matching it can be released, because provision does not arrive into a container smaller than what it requires. Surrender depth is the third variable, and this is the most sensitive of the 3, because it is the one most directly connected to sovereignty consciousness. It is the measure of how fully the chosen one has released the outcome to God, not given up on it. Released the management of it. Stopped trying to force, calculate, engineer, or accelerate the timeline by their own effort. Moved from striving to trusting. When a chosen one is striving, the blessing is held back, not as punishment, but because provision that arrives into a striving hand tends to be credited to the striving rather than to the source. And the chosen one who credits their breakthrough to their own engineering has not been prepared to steward it as the gift it is. When the chosen one has released the outcome, when the grip has loosened from the timeline and the method and the specific path the answer is supposed to arrive through, when they are genuinely open to the blessing arriving through a Wednesday afternoon conversation they almost didn't have, at that depth of surrender, the provision can be released without producing the misattribution. Where are you in the formation of all three? Take a moment with that question. Not to evaluate yourself harshly, just honestly. Of the three, character capacity is the most developed in most chosen ones at your stage. The wilderness has been working on it the longest. Vision scope tends to be developing, growing larger as the formation deepens, and surrender depth is almost always the one still in the most active process. And this is why God, who sees all three variables clearly, knows exactly when the equation produces the conditions for the release. It is not arbitrary. It is not random. It is not a mystery. It is a specific intersection of three specific things that are all forming in you right now. And when they reach the required threshold together, the blessing comes suddenly, completely, and at the scale the purpose requires. You are closer to that intersection than you know. I said at the beginning of this part that the revelation that makes everything else make sense was still ahead. And I have shown you the economy. I have shown you the three biblical precedents, and I have shown you the equation. But the revelation, the full revelation one, is this. You have not received your billionaire's blessing yet, not because God is withholding it, and not because you have failed to qualify for it, but because He is faithful. Faithful to the assignment He placed on your life. Faithful to ensure that when the blessing arrives, it lands in hands that were built to carry it, in a heart that knows where it came from, in a vision large enough to use it correctly, and in a life surrendered enough to let it flow through rather than close around it. He is not withholding, He is building. And there is something I have not yet shown you about what He is building. Something that is happening right now, not just in your character and your vision and your surrender, but in the actual invisible infrastructure of your breakthrough. A movement, specifically 5 movements, that God makes in the unseen realm before a billionaire blessing is released into the visible world. I am going to show you all 5. And the reason I said I need to show you this is that the 4th movement, the one that is happening right now in your life, is the one that almost every chosen one in a financial wilderness season misreads as a sign that something is going wrong, when it is, in fact, the single clearest indicator that the release is imminent. Stay with me. In the economy of God, the visible world is always the last to know. What appears in the physical realm, the open door, the conversation that shifts everything, the provision that arrives suddenly and at scale, is never the beginning of what God has been doing. It is the final act. The moment when what has been assembled in the invisible becomes undeniable in the visible. And between the promise and the physical manifestation, there are 5 specific movements God makes in the unseen realm. They are not random. They are not mysterious. They follow a sequence, and they follow it consistently across every documented case of billionaire-level breakthrough in the lives of God's chosen ones. I want to show you all 5. And I want to show you which one is active in your life right now. The first movement is relational positioning. Before the blessing arrives, God begins moving people, not all people, specific people. And He moves them with a precision that only becomes visible in retrospect. Some are moved out. Relationships that were once central begin to quietly recede, not through drama, not through conflict, not through anything that can be pointed to as a clear cause, but through a natural pulling apart that carries its own momentum. These people are not being removed because they are bad people or because the relationship was a failure. They are being repositioned because the next chapter of your story requires a different relational infrastructure than the one that served the wilderness season. And as some recede, others arrive, quietly, without announcement. People whose paths begin crossing yours with a frequency that carries the faint quality of intention. People who see something in you before you have said much. People whose presence activates something in your thinking, or your clarity, or your sense of what is possible that was not accessible before they were in the room. You may have already noticed some of this happening. What I want you to understand is that both movements, the receding and the arriving, are the same movement. It is one orchestration, not two separate events. God is assembling the people who need to be in position before the blessing lands, because a billionaire-level assignment requires a billionaire-level relational infrastructure. And he begins building that infrastructure before the assignment is visible, so that when the blessing arrives, the right people are already there. The connections you are forming in this season that feel unexpected or slightly out of your normal pattern, the people arriving in your orbit without obvious explanation, pay attention to them. They are not coincidences, they are relational positioning. The first movement is already in operation. The second movement is opportunity seeding. God begins planting small, often dismissible opportunities in the path of the chosen one before the major release arrives. These do not look like the breakthrough. They are too small to look like the breakthrough. They look like mild encouragements, minor openings, small favors extended from unexpected directions. Things that could easily be received as pleasant, but ultimately insignificant if the chosen one is only watching for something large. And this is where many chosen ones miss them. They are watching for the door, the one large obvious door, and they walk past several small ones without registering that each small opening is connected to a larger structure being assembled behind it. Joseph's interpretation of the cupbearer's dream was a small opportunity. In the moment, it was a kindness extended to a man in an ordinary prison conversation. There was nothing about it that looked like the hinge it actually was. It looked like a small moment. It was the pivot on which an entire life turned. The small opportunities appearing in your life right now are not consolation prizes from a God who hasn't delivered the real thing yet. They are seeds. Each one planted with a specific intention, in a specific place, in a specific sequence, and each one connected to the others in a way that is not yet fully visible from where you stand. Do not be too large to receive small things. In God's economy, the seed that looks too small to matter is often the one that grows into the tree that changes everything. The third movement is what I would call the removal of what would corrupt or destroy the blessing before it arrives. This movement is the most invisible of the five and often the most uncomfortable, because what is being removed does not always feel like removal from danger. It sometimes feels like loss. God looks ahead to the blessing he is preparing to release, and he sees what that blessing, at that scale, would encounter in the life of the chosen one as it currently exists. He sees relationships that would exploit it, environments that would diminish it, habits of thinking that would misdirect it, attachments to particular outcomes that would cause the chosen one to receive the blessing in the wrong way and lose what it was designed to produce. And with a care that looks from the inside like loss, he clears those things. Sometimes this is a relationship ending that felt important. Sometimes it is a plan dissolving that felt promising. Sometimes it is an opportunity closing that you were counting on. Sometimes it is a version of yourself, a way of seeing yourself or your story that has to be released before the new identity can be inhabited. From the outside, none of this looks like preparation. It looks like things falling apart. But in the economy of God, things rarely fall apart randomly. They are cleared specifically, and they are cleared because the blessing is too valuable to release into an environment that would undermine it before it can do what it was designed to do. The losses of this season that you cannot fully explain, the things that dissolved without a clear reason, the doors that closed when they seemed like they should have stayed open. I am not going to tell you that all of them were easy or that there is no grief in them. There may be real grief. But they were not accidents. They were the third movement making room. The fourth movement is the one I told you about, the one that almost everyone misreads. It is the final pressure of formation. God does not release a chosen one into their billionaire season until the formation is complete, and completion does not arrive gently. It arrives through a concentrated intensification of pressure in the final stage. Think about what happens in the natural world immediately before a breakthrough of any kind. The seed is under the most pressure in the days just before it germinates. The caterpillar is most completely dissolved inside the chrysalis in the final stage before the wings form. The diamond is at the peak of compression immediately before the transformation is complete. The intensification of difficulty you may be feeling right now, if things have recently felt harder rather than easier, if the pressure has increased rather than released, if it seems like you are closer to the edge than you have been in a long time, I need you to hear this very carefully. That is not a sign that the blessing is pulling back. It is a sign that the formation is in its final stage. The pressure does not increase when breakthrough is retreating. It increases when breakthrough is approaching. And the specific quality of pressure you feel at the end of a long wilderness season is different from the pressure you felt in the middle of it. The pressure in the middle is sustained and heavy. The pressure at the end is more acute. It feels more targeted, more personal, like the final compression of something that is about to release. Right now, across the world, there are chosen ones who are in this exact pressure, not because something has gone wrong, because the fourth movement is the final formation stage, and it is most intense in the last season before the threshold. If you have been feeling recently like the pressure has increased instead of decreased, if the waiting has felt harder in recent months than it did a year ago, if the intensity of the season has sharpened in ways that don't feel sustainable, I want to say something directly to you. You are not moving away from your breakthrough. You are inside the fourth movement, which means you are closer than you have ever been. And the fifth movement, the final one before release, is divine timing alignment. This is the convergence. The first four movements do not operate independently. They are being coordinated. The relational positioning, the opportunity seeding, the clearing of what would corrupt the blessing, the final formation pressure, all of it is being orchestrated toward a specific intersection point. A moment where all four movements reach sufficient completion simultaneously and the conditions for the release are fully in place. That moment is not arbitrary. It is calculated with a precision that no human planning could replicate, because it requires the alignment of internal readiness, external infrastructure, relational positioning, and divine purpose all arriving at the same threshold at the same time. And when they do, the release is not something God deliberates over or withholds out of caution. It is simply what happens when all the preparation meets its completion. Suddenly, completely, in the economy of God, on the timeline of God, at the scale the purpose requires, the fifth movement is already in process. You are not standing outside the door of your breakthrough waiting for God to notice you. You are inside the fifth movement. All five are active in your life right now. The relational positioning is happening. The seeds have been planted. The clearing has been happening, even where it felt like loss. The final formation pressure is intensifying, not retreating. And the alignment is converging. And here is something I need you to hear. Something that I think you need to receive, not just intellectually, but in the part of you that has been carrying this season alone. You are not in this alone. Right now, all across the world, chosen ones who were formed for this assignment are in this exact season. Different circumstances, different specific shapes to their wilderness. but the same 5 movements, the same final formation stage, the same intensifying pressure that precedes the release. You have never been the only one. And you are not alone in this now. The convergence is not just happening in you, it is happening across a generation of chosen ones who were each built for the assignment of this specific time. And the blessing being released is not just for your life. It is for every life your life is designed to reach. The scale of what is coming is proportional to the scope of the need it was sent to address, and the need is significant. Now, I want to show you something about how God specifically orchestrates the channel through which the billionaire blessing tends to arrive. Because if you are expecting a supernatural event, a vision, a direct appearance, a clear and undeniable sign from heaven pointing the way, I want to gently redirect that expectation, not because God does not operate supernaturally, but because the specific pattern of how provision arrives in the lives of chosen ones across Scripture and across history is consistently, almost without exception, through natural appearing channels. Channels that do not look supernatural when they are happening, that only reveal their divine orchestration when seen from a distance. Joseph was not released from prison by an angel. He was released because a man remembered a conversation. Abraham did not receive his wealth through a supernatural transfer of gold from heaven to his tent. He received it through business, through negotiation, through the kind of activity that looks entirely ordinary from the outside. Solomon's wisdom arrived supernaturally in a dream, but its expression and the wealth that accompanied it came through governance, through relationships with foreign kings, through trade arrangements that operated inside normal human commercial activity. The blessing arrives through a phone call that came at the right moment, through a conversation with someone you barely know, through a deal that takes shape through ordinary channels, through an opportunity that looks, when it first appears, like any other opportunity, except for a quality it carries that the chosen one recognizes, a sense of rightness, a recognition, an interior confirmation that this is the door. You will know the door when it opens, not because it comes with visible supernatural markings, but because something in you, calibrated by every day of this formation season, will recognize it as the thing that was being assembled while you were waiting. And you will be ready for it, because the formation has been specifically preparing you for exactly this kind of recognition. I want to pause here for a moment, because there is something I discovered in the research that has informed everything I've been sharing with you today that I need to come back to. Earlier in this message, I touched briefly on a finding from Princeton, a neuroscience researcher who spent years studying the transition from what he called the formation season to the breakthrough season, measuring the brains of people who were at the exact threshold you are at, using equipment that can measure brain activity in real time, and looking for what, neurologically, distinguished the people who successfully stepped across that threshold from the people who stopped just short of it. And what he found was not what he expected. He expected to find differences in belief, in mindset, in the psychological patterns that distinguish people who think positively from people who don't. He expected that the people who crossed the threshold would simply have stronger or more consistent positive thinking. That is not what the data showed. What distinguished the people who crossed the threshold from those who didn't was a specific neurological state, a measurable, observable, repeatable pattern in brain activity, a frequency that his team had been studying in connection with exceptional human performance, with the kind of clarity and intuition and recognition that shows up in the accounts of every person who has ever described a breakthrough season. The scientists have a name for this frequency. They call it gamma. And here is what he found about the chosen ones he was studying. The people who had been in formation seasons of exactly the kind I've been describing. The long seasons, the deep preparation, the 5 traits, the pressure of the 4th movement. Their gamma levels had been suppressed, not by weakness, not by lack of faith or lack of effort, by the accumulated weight of the prolonged stress of the season they had been living inside. And the people who crossed the threshold successfully were not simply the ones who thought harder or believed more. They were the ones whose gamma had been restored. I am going to come back to this in the next part of this message, because what this researcher discovered about how gamma is restored, and how quickly, and what it produces when it is, connects directly to everything I've been teaching you about why some chosen ones step fully into their season and others stop right at the edge of it. It is one of the most important things I've encountered in all of the research behind this message, and I don't want to rush it. Hold that. Because before I show you the final revelation, the one that recontextualizes everything, there is one more truth I need to place in your hands first. The truth about the thing that is standing between you and the billionaire blessing that is already in motion. The 5 movements are active. The economy is operating in your favor. The formation is in its final stage. But there is something on the inside of this journey that most chosen ones carry all the way to the edge of their breakthrough without recognizing it as the last thing standing between them and the threshold. It is not a circumstance. It is not a person. It is not something external that can be moved by prayer alone. It is a belief. One belief, held quietly in a place most people never examine, that has been doing more damage to the landing of the billionaire blessing than any external obstacle ever could. And in the next part of this message, I am going to name it, directly, specifically. And when I do, I believe something is going to shift in you that has been waiting to shift for a long time. The belief has a name, and once you hear it named clearly, it loses most of its power. Stay with me for the part that changes everything. There is one belief that stands between most chosen ones and the billionaire blessing that is already in motion toward them. Not a circumstance, not a person, not a closed door that hasn't opened yet. A belief, one specific belief, quietly held in a place so deep that most people have never directly examined it. A belief that has been operating in the background of every prayer, every season of waiting, every moment of almost receiving, and then watching the thing dissolve before it fully landed. And I am going to name it now. The belief is this: that a blessing of this scale is real, that it is possible, that God is capable of releasing it, that other chosen ones in other times and other circumstances have received it, but not me. Not me specifically, not at this scale, not given my history, my failures, my particular shape of lacking, the specific ways I have fallen short of the person I intended to be in this season. Maybe a simpler version of the blessing, maybe a more modest provision, maybe something closer to what makes logical sense given what I have actually demonstrated. But the billionaire level, that is for someone who has done this better than I have. I want to spend real time on this, because this belief, this quiet exception that the chosen one makes about their own life while affirming the principle for everyone else, is not a small thing. It is the last barrier. It is the one thing that has been standing at the edge of the threshold, invisible and unnamed, filtering out what God has been attempting to release, because the hand receiving it keeps unconsciously redirecting it away from itself. It has a name. The name is unworthiness. And I want to show you how it was built. Unworthiness is not a conclusion you reached suddenly. It was not a decision you made. It was constructed slowly over the length of your wilderness from a specific material that is available in abundance during a long waiting season. The material is the gap between what was promised and what is visibly present, between the identity you carry and the circumstances that surround that identity, between the calling you know is real and the evidence of that calling that the world can currently see. When that gap is small or temporary, it produces very little unworthiness. The mind holds the promise and waits without much damage to the sense of self. But when the gap is sustained over years, when the distance between the declaration and the evidence does not close, the mind begins, gradually, and without fully announcing what it is doing, to use the gap as evidence. evidence that the declaration may have been too large, evidence that the promise was perhaps not as direct as it was initially received, evidence that other people's calling looks more confirmed than yours, evidence that if the breakthrough were truly coming, some visible sign of it would have arrived by now. The gap does not produce unworthiness by itself. It produces it through the interpretation the mind attaches to the gap's persistence. And the interpretation the mind most easily reaches, in the absence of visible confirmation, is the one that places the explanation inside the person rather than inside the process. Not, the process takes this long. But the process takes this long for me because there is something about me that has not qualified. That is the construction of unworthiness, not a verdict delivered from outside, a conclusion drawn quietly from inside, using the only material available in a season where the external evidence has been scarce. And once it is constructed, it functions in ways that are almost entirely invisible. The function of unworthiness is not to make a chosen one stop praying or stop believing. It allows them to continue doing both. It is far subtler than that. What it does is install a filter that processes every incoming provision, every opening opportunity, every relationship arriving with potential, every small door from the second movement, through the lens of, is this the size that someone like me receives? And when something arrives that exceeds that measurement, the filter does not announce itself. It does not say, you are unworthy of this and therefore rejecting it. It simply produces a quiet, plausible reason why this particular thing is not quite right, why the timing is off, why the person making the offer can't be fully trusted, why moving forward on this would be premature, why waiting a little longer is the wiser, more discerning choice. The reasons always sound like wisdom. They are often articulated in spiritual language. Caution, discernment, not rushing ahead of God, waiting for complete clarity. And sometimes those reasons are genuine wisdom. But in the chosen one who carries unexamined unworthiness, those reasons appear with suspicious consistency every time the incoming provision approaches a scale that exceeds the internal measurement of what someone like them deserves. The blessing arrives. The filter processes it. The filter finds a plausible reason. The blessing is redirected. And the chosen one continues to pray and believe and wait, genuinely puzzled about why the breakthrough keeps approaching and then not landing, never fully seeing that the mechanism doing the redirecting is not outside their circumstances, but inside their own belief about themselves. That is the function of unworthiness, and it is costly in ways that are almost impossible to calculate from inside it. Now, I want to do something. I want to give these three voices a voice, because unworthiness does not operate as a single clear statement. It is more like a chorus of three, each voice speaking in slightly different language, each one arriving in a slightly different context, and together they produce the interior architecture that does the filtering. The first voice says, people like me do not receive this kind of blessing, not explicitly, not as a sentence you would actually say out loud, but as a background assumption that shapes how incoming possibility is received. When you hear about someone else's breakthrough, this voice does not object to the breakthrough. It quietly notes the differences between that person and you. Their background, their consistency, their obvious favor, the ways their story confirmed their calling visibly before the major breakthrough arrived. And it uses those differences not to attack you, but simply to note that your profile is different. That the pattern for someone like you, given those differences, would logically produce something different in scale, something more proportional to what your profile suggests rather than what the promise declared. This voice never tells you that you are worthless. It just tells you that you are a specific kind of person, and that specific kind of person receives provision at a specific kind of scale, and that scale is somewhat more modest than Billionaire. It sounds like realism. It operates as a ceiling. The second voice says, if God really wanted to bless me at this level, he would have by now. This is the voice that uses the length of your season as its primary evidence. It does not deny God's power. It questions God's intention toward you specifically. It says, the waiting is data. And the data points to a conclusion about how highly God prioritizes your specific breakthrough relative to others who have received theirs more quickly and more visibly. This voice is particularly damaging because it is framed as an honest reading of the evidence rather than a distortion of it. The waiting is real. The length is real. The absence of visible confirmation is real. And this voice simply connects those real things to a conclusion that feels impossible to argue with because it is built from facts. But the conclusion is not the only conclusion those facts support. The same facts support the readiness equation, the formation process, the 5 movements, and the pattern of every single chosen one across Scripture who stood in this exact season. The voice uses real evidence to reach a false conclusion, and because the evidence is real, the false conclusion feels true. The third voice is the quietest and in many ways the most corrosive. It says, I want this so badly that there must be something spiritually wrong with the wanting. This is the voice that turns the 7th sign, the holy longing, into a character indictment. It monitors the desire for provision at this scale and reads it as spiritual greed, as worldliness, as the kind of ambition that signals impurity of motive. And because the chosen one genuinely does not want to be someone whose wanting is corrupt, they respond to this voice by suppressing the desire, by making themselves smaller about what they believe is coming, by speaking carefully, guardedly, modestly about what they are believing for, in case the boldness of the belief is itself evidence of something that needs to be corrected. And in suppressing the longing, they suppress the signal, the clearest indicator that the season is changing. The 7th sign, gone quiet, not because it stopped being true, but because a voice convinced them that feeling it too fully was spiritually dangerous. 3 voices, 3 different angles, 1 unified interior architecture that, operating together, does something that no external obstacle could accomplish. It makes the chosen one guard against their own breakthrough. I want to stop here, and I want to tell you something I have watched happen in a specific life that I think you need to hear. There was a woman who had been in a financial wilderness for 7 years, and at the end of her 7th year, the door opened. Not a door she had been watching for. A door in a direction she had never considered. Arriving through a connection she had nearly forgotten. An opportunity that, when she examined it clearly, matched her gifts and her assignment almost perfectly. An opening that carried the specific quality she had learned through 7 years of formation to recognize as real rather than false. She knew it was the door. She felt it in the same place she had felt the promise in the first year of her wilderness. The same quality, the same interior confirmation. And within 48 hours, she had found 5 reasons why moving forward on it would be premature. The timing was uncertain. The person who had opened the door was someone she didn't know well enough to fully trust. The opportunity required a level of visibility she wasn't sure she was ready for. The scale of what it was offering felt too large for where she was right now, and spiritually, she was not sure she had heard clearly enough to move with confidence. None of those reasons were invented. Every one of them contained a fragment of real truth. The timing was genuinely uncertain. She did not know the person well. The visibility was real. The scale was large. But here is what she told me later, after she had done the work of seeing what had actually happened. Every one of those 5 reasons, she said, was the third voice, repackaged, dressed in the language of wisdom and discernment, speaking in the cadence of spiritual caution, and completely unrecognizable as the filter it actually was, because it arrived through her own voice, in her own mind, using her own spiritual vocabulary. She went back to that door 6 weeks later and found it still open, barely. She walked through it, and what she received on the other side was not what she would have called modest. But what she also carried out of that experience was something she said she would never trade, even for a faster path to the blessing. She finally saw the filter. She saw it operating. She saw it in real time, in a real situation, doing exactly what I have just described to you. And once she saw it, it could not do what it had been doing, because what unworthiness requires to function is invisibility. Once it is seen, it loses most of its power. I need you to see it now. Because here is the most important distinction in this entire section, and possibly in this entire message. You do not receive the billionaire's blessing because you are worthy of it. Let me say that again, because I need it to land in its full meaning and not be skipped over. You do not receive the billionaire's blessing because you are worthy. You receive it because of who God is and what He has placed on your life and what His purpose requires to be fulfilled through you. These are completely different foundations, and the difference between them is not small. The first foundation, the worthiness foundation, is one that can never be fully established by any human being in any season. Because worthiness, understood as a status earned through consistent performance and uninterrupted faithfulness and the absence of failure, is not a threshold that human beings actually reach. Every chosen one who has ever lived has a chapter they would rather not have included. Everyone has a season of doubt they are not proud of. Everyone has a version of themselves they can point to and say, "That is not who I want to be." If the billionaire's blessing required the worthiness standard, it would never land anywhere. God did not choose Joseph because Joseph was worthy. Joseph had been thrown in a pit by his own family and had spent years in prison on a false charge. His story, on paper, contained material that would disqualify him under the worthiness standard. God chose Joseph because God had a purpose for Joseph's life, and that purpose required the platform of the second most powerful position in the most powerful nation in the world. And Joseph, through the formation of 13 years, had been built into the person that purpose required. Not worthy, ready. There is a significant difference between those two words. Worthy is a status you earn. Ready is a condition you are built into. And the formation season, all of it, every day of it, every hard chapter of it, has been building you not into worthiness, which was never the standard, but into readiness. The billionaire's blessing is not a reward for a grade you achieved. It is a deployment for an assignment you were built for. And the chosen one who understands this at the bone level, who stops measuring themselves against the worthiness standard and starts inhabiting the readiness reality, removes the last interior obstacle between themselves and what is already in motion toward them. The filter is not a moral failure. It was built by a misunderstanding of the standard. And now that you see the standard clearly, the filter loses its logic. Let me show you the 3 specific behaviors this unworthiness architecture tends to produce in chosen ones at your stage. Because seeing the behaviors is how you catch the filter operating before it does the redirecting. The first behavior is timeline comparison. This is the consistent practice of measuring your breakthrough against the visible timing of other people's breakthroughs. It is quiet, often unconscious, and almost always produces the same result, which is a sense that your timeline is longer than it should be given your level of faith and commitment. The problem with timeline comparison is that it is comparing a visible external timeline to an invisible internal formation process. You can see when someone else's door opened. You cannot see the 13 years of Joseph's formation that preceded the morning of his release unless you read the account carefully and completely. You cannot see the depth of the 5 traits in someone else's story. You cannot see where they are in the readiness equation. You only see the outcome, and you measure your process against their outcome. This is like measuring the quality of a root system by looking at the height of the tree without knowing how long the root was growing underground before the first visible inch of trunk appeared. Your timeline is not a verdict on the quality of your formation. It is a reflection of the depth of it. The larger the assignment, the deeper the roots required. and the deeper the roots, the longer they take to establish before the growth above ground begins. Stop measuring your roots against someone else's trunk. The second behavior is the minimizing of the signs. This is what the filter does to the 7 signs we walked through at the beginning of this message. The restlessness gets called ingratitude. The relational reorganization gets interpreted as loss. The oversized ideas get filed under delusion. The compression gets read as things going wrong. The unexpected alignments get dismissed as coincidence. The financial clarity gets attributed to wishful thinking. And the holy longing gets suppressed as spiritual immaturity. Every sign, processed through the unworthiness filter, comes out looking like a problem. This is not occasional misreading. This is systematic. The filter is consistent in its direction. It will always reinterpret incoming confirmation as incoming evidence of inadequacy, because that is the direction the internal belief is set to point. And the practical cost is that the chosen one, who is surrounded by 7 active signs of approaching breakthrough, is living as if they have received no confirmation at all, because every confirmation has been processed into its opposite by the filter they don't know they are running. Now that you see the 7 signs clearly, and now that you see the filter clearly, you have what you need to stop the minimizing. Not by forcing positive interpretation onto everything, by simply refusing to let the filter do its work before you have examined what is actually arriving. Hold the sign before you process it. Ask what it actually is before you decide what it means. The third behavior is what I would call the scale apology. This is the practice of qualifying what you believe is coming whenever you speak it out loud, of adding adjustments and hedges that reduce the declared scale of the promise to something more socially and spiritually acceptable, of making yourself small about the size of what you are believing for, in case the boldness of the belief is received as arrogance or presumption, or the kind of faith that sets someone up for public disappointment. You have done this. I don't say that as an accusation. I say it because almost every chosen one in this season has done it, and most of them have done it in the sincere belief that they were being appropriately humble. But there is a difference between humility and apology. Humility is the honest acknowledgement that the provision comes from God and not from your own merit. Apology is the reduction of the promise because you are not sure you deserve to speak it at full scale. Humility keeps the source accurate. Apology keeps the promise small. God did not give you a billionaire's promise so you would speak it at a quarter of its size to avoid the appearance of presumption. He gave it to you at full scale because that is what the assignment requires, and He expects you to carry the full scale of it with the same open-handed faithfulness you have been carrying everything else in this season. Stop apologizing for the size of what God promised. It was not given to you at that size by mistake. And before I show you the largest truth in this message, the one that recontextualizes not just your financial season but your entire identity and calling in a single shift, I need to speak something to you. Not teach, not explain, speak. There is a declaration coming at the end of this message, a specific, intentional, word-by-word declaration over your life that I have been building this entire journey toward. I don't want you to miss it by stepping away before it arrives, because what I am going to speak over you before this message closes is not a general encouragement. It is specific, it is positioned, and I believe it has been prepared for this moment in your journey with a precision that will be unmistakable when you hear it. Stay with me through everything that remains, because what is coming in the next section is the truth that makes every other truth in this message make sense. And what follows that is the declaration I believe you have been needing to hear for longer than you may realize. We are nearly at the threshold. Don't step away now. Here is what I need you to hold as you move into what comes next. The obstacle is named. You have seen it. Unworthiness, built from the gap, functioning as a filter, producing 3 specific behaviors that have been redirecting provision before it could land. And now that it is named and seen, something important can happen. Because here is the truth about unworthiness. It is not a flaw in who you are. It is a misidentification of the standard you are being measured against. You were never being measured against a worthiness standard that you had to earn through perfect performance. You were always being built toward a readiness standard that God was constructing through the exact wilderness you have been in. The filter was installed by a lie. And the lie is this, that the blessing has a prerequisite that you may not have met. The truth is this, the only prerequisite is readiness, and the wilderness, in all of its length and weight and pressure, has been producing that readiness with a precision you could not have manufactured yourself. You are not at the edge of the threshold because you finally got enough right. You are at the edge of the threshold because the building is almost complete, and the mega revelation, the single truth that makes everything else snap into place, is still ahead. And it is the most important thing in this message. The belief that you are not the right person for a blessing at this scale, that belief has one final answer coming, and it is going to change how you see yourself in this story permanently. I want to stop building toward the center and go directly to it. Because we have covered the economy, we have walked through the 5 movements. We have named the obstacle and seen it clearly. And every part of this journey has been pointing toward a single truth that holds all of it together. The truth that makes the 7 signs make sense. The truth that explains why the billionaire's blessing has to be at this scale. The truth that answers the unworthiness belief at its root rather than at its surface. And here it is. You are not just a recipient of the billionaire's blessing. You are the billionaire's blessing. Let that sit for a moment before I explain it. Not as a motivational phrase, as a structural truth about how God operates in the lives of the chosen ones. He calls to significant assignment. Here is what I mean. When God sends a billionaire's blessing toward a chosen one, He is not simply depositing provision into a personal account. He is releasing into the world, through the vehicle of this specific person's elevation and resources and influence, the provision, the wisdom, the healing, the breakthrough that has been locked inside that person during the entire formation season. The world is not waiting for you to receive the blessing and then become generous with it someday. Eventually, after you have secured your own situation. The world has been waiting for what is inside you during the entire time you were waiting for the blessing to arrive. The provision was never just for your life. It was always designed to move through your life, the way water moves through a channel, gathering purpose and direction from the shape the channel gives it, and then flowing outward toward the need it was sent to address. And here is what this means for the scale of the blessing. The reason it has to be billionaire level is not because your personal needs require billionaire level provision. Your personal needs are modest relative to what has been promised. The reason the blessing has to be at this scale is because the assignment is at this scale. Because the people who are waiting on what you carry require provision to arrive through you at a level that can actually reach them all. Think about the assignments of the 3 we studied. Joseph was not elevated to governor of Egypt because he personally required the resources of a national economy to live well. He was elevated because his assignment was to preserve life across an entire region during a 7-year famine. The scale of the provision matched the scale of the need it was designed to address. Solomon was not given surpassing wealth because his personal lifestyle required it. The wealth became the demonstration of God's faithfulness that caused the Queen of Sheba to say that not even half of it had been reported, and that the people who served him were blessed to be in his presence daily. The wealth was a channel through which God demonstrated something that caused nations to seek wisdom rather than merely military power. Abraham was not the end point of the covenant. He was the beginning of it. The blessing flowed through him toward a reach that extended to all families of the earth, including the family that would produce the chosen one of all chosen ones, whose provision, whose sacrifice, whose breakthrough has been flowing through every generation that received it since. The blessing moved through all three of them, and the blessing being sent to you was always designed to move through you. This is why the formation matters so much. This is why the 5 traits were being built with such precision and care. This is why the unworthiness belief is so costly. Not primarily because it delays your personal provision, but because it delays the arrival of what the people waiting on you need from your life. Your financial elevation is not the end of the story. It is the vehicle of the story God is writing through you, for every person your life was designed to reach. And here is the recontextualization. Every day of your wilderness, every prayer that felt like it didn't land, every season of compression, every door that closed, every provision that was just enough and never more than just enough, every moment of carrying the promise through the silence. None of it was just waiting. It was preparation for the channel. A channel does not receive more water than it can carry without collapse. It needs to be built to the size and strength of what it is designed to carry. And what you are being built to carry flows through a channel that required 13 years of formation, or 7 years, or however many years your specific formation has taken, because the volume of what needs to move through you toward the world that is waiting requires a channel of exactly that depth and that strength and that width. The wilderness was not the delay. The wilderness was the channel being built. And when you receive the billionaire's blessing, the full deployment of provision and influence and reach that God has been preparing for your life, you will understand, in a way that no explanation can fully produce ahead of time, exactly why every part of the formation was necessary, because you will see what the provision is for, and you will be able to hold it at that scale, with open hands, in the posture of sovereignty consciousness, flowing it outward toward the need it was designed to address, because the wilderness built the interior of the channel precisely for this purpose. You are not just a recipient. You are the vessel, the channel, the vehicle through which the billionaire's blessing does what it was always designed to do. And the people waiting on the other side of your breakthrough need you to receive it. Not someday, now, in this season, in this life, in the fullness of what was promised, and not at some modest, discounted version of it. Because a diminished channel does not serve the need waiting beyond it. Step into the full size of what you were built for. I told you, at the very beginning of this message, that by the end, you would understand not just what is coming, but exactly why it has been prepared specifically for you. This is the understanding, not just that you are chosen, not just that the blessing is coming, but that the blessing is coming through you at billionaire scale, because that is the only scale that matches the assignment your life was built to carry. Your formation was to build the character. Your invisibility was to build the foundation. Your faithfulness in the silence was to build the infrastructure. And right now, all three of those things are meeting in you, converging in the 5th movement, approaching the threshold of the sudden release that God's economy produces when the formation is complete. You are not waiting to become the person who receives the billionaire's blessing. You are the person. You have been the person since before the wilderness began. The wilderness did not determine whether you were worthy. It determined whether the channel was ready. And the channel is almost ready. Hold that. Now, I want to come back to something I introduced earlier, because this is the moment it belongs. I mentioned a neuroscience researcher, a discovery from Princeton, a neurological frequency that corresponds to what Scripture describes as the renewing of the mind, the specific interior quality that shows up in the brains of the chosen ones who successfully cross the threshold into their breakthrough season. I said I would come back to it. And now, after everything we have walked through together, after you understand the formation and the 5 movements and the identity of the channel and why the scale of the blessing matches the scale of the assignment, this discovery is going to land differently than it would have at the beginning of this message, because now you have the context to receive what it actually means. There is a specific quality that shows up consistently in the lives and testimonies of chosen ones who have stepped fully into their breakthrough season. A quality that is difficult to describe in words, but immediately recognizable when described in experience. It is a sharpness of mind that feels different from ordinary thinking, a clarity that arrives from somewhere deeper than effort, an intuitive recognition that operates faster than the linear analysis process, seeing connections before they are logically traceable, receiving a sense of rightness about people and decisions and directions before the reasoning has had time to fully process. A state where the thinking that used to require significant effort becomes almost effortless, and the insights that were previously inaccessible begin arriving freely. People across every tradition have described this state in the language of their tradition. The renewing of the mind, the anointing, the opened eye, flow state, the zone. Inspiration in its original meaning, which was the breath of divine infilling. But in the scientific community, specifically in the field of neuroscience, it has a measurable name. It is gamma. Dr. Robert Lake spent 34 years as a neuroscience researcher, and for the last significant portion of his career, he focused on a specific question that I want to share with you, because it is the same question I have been asking throughout this message from a different angle. His question was this: why do two people in nearly identical circumstances, with nearly identical backgrounds, nearly identical levels of preparation and faith and effort, produce dramatically different outcomes at the threshold of a major life transition? He took that question into the laboratory, into the EEG equipment that measures brainwave activity in real time, with numbers and frequencies and visual patterns, not with impressions or self-reports. And across hundreds of subjects, studying people who were at exactly the kind of threshold we have been describing, people who were in the season before their significant transition, people who carried the sense of imminent breakthrough that we have been talking about throughout this message, he found something that his entire team had not anticipated. The difference was not psychological, it was not primarily attitudinal. It was not a difference in the content of their beliefs, or the frequency of their practice, or the consistency of their spiritual devotion. It was a difference in gamma. The people who crossed the threshold successfully showed elevated gamma wave activity, specifically at the moment of recognition and decision. The clarity, the intuitive sharpness, the ability to recognize the door when it arrived and move through it without the filtering and redirecting that unworthiness produces, all of it was accompanied by elevated gamma. And the people who stopped just short of the threshold showed something measurable and specific: gamma suppression. Not as a permanent condition, not as a neurological flaw, as the accumulated result of the prolonged stress of the formation season. Here is what he found. Chosen ones, and I want you to hear this carefully because it connects directly to the identity we have been building throughout this message. The people who were born with a higher level of natural gamma than the average person, which is why they were always the ones who learned faster and felt more deeply and carried intuitions that other people didn't have access to, are also the ones who, when they go through the extended pressure of a formation season, experience a greater suppression of that gamma than most people would. Not because they are weaker, because they started higher, and the further the drop, the heavier the season feels. The weight you have been carrying in this wilderness, the heaviness that has felt disproportionate to what the people around you seem to feel in comparable circumstances, is not a sign of spiritual weakness. It is the sign of someone whose natural gamma was higher to begin with, and whose formation season has been pressing against that height with consistent intensity for a sustained period. The gap between who you were and who you have been becoming is the gap of gamma, and it is a gap that can be closed. Dr. Lake spent the last decade of his research doing exactly that, studying how gamma is restored. Not through months of meditation, which requires a level of sustained practice that most people in a formation season do not have the margin to maintain, not through expensive biofeedback equipment that measures brain activity in real time, which can cost $7,000 and requires professional administration at $300 per session, but through a specific architecture of sound, a 7-minute audio track that uses a technology called brain entrainment to bring the brain directly into gamma frequency, not gradually over weeks and months. In real time, within the 7 minutes of a single listening session, he compressed 34 years of neuroscience research into a tool that works in the space of a single morning. Let me tell you about a man who experienced what this kind of suppression actually looks like in a real life. He was 51 years old. He had spent the better part of his career as a reliable, committed professional, the kind of person who always delivered, who people described as sharp, who had a reputation for thinking clearly in high-pressure situations. Then his company downsized, not because of his performance, because of restructuring. And he found himself for the first time in his adult life out of work. He was not devastated initially. He had confidence in his skills. He had a solid track record. He expected the next chapter to arrive within a few months. 11 months later, he was still searching. Not for lack of trying. He described himself as doing everything right on paper. The applications were going out. The interviews were happening. But something was not translating. He described the interview rooms this way. He would walk in feeling like himself, feeling like the person he had always been, and then something would happen under the pressure of the room. His mind would go, as he put it, foggy. The words that should have been immediately accessible would arrive slowly. The clarity that he had always relied on, the thinking on his feet quality that had defined his professional identity for decades, was simply not there when he needed it most. He had had that clarity for his whole career. And now, in the season where he needed it more than ever, it was gone. He described the gap the same way I have been describing it throughout this message. The gap between who he knew he was and who he was performing as. The gap of gamma. He was 11 days into using the 7-minute listening practice when the call came. Not from a job he had applied to. From a connection he had met once, briefly, over a year before, in a conversation he had nearly forgotten. And in the 45 minutes of that conversation, a door opened that he had never seen and never sought. A position better than the one he had left, with more responsibility, more scope, more reach. He said later, "I did not change my resume. I did not change my strategy. I changed what was happening in my mind when I walked into a room. The door was always there. The gamma, to recognize and walk through it, was what had been missing." Now I want to speak directly to the person in you who has been carrying the season I have been describing throughout this message. The person who has had the clarity. Who knows what they are capable of. Who has operated in seasons of sharpness and intuition and recognition that felt genuinely extraordinary. And who has watched that sharpness become harder to access as the formation season has extended. That sharpness is not gone. It was never your permanent condition. It was your God-given natural gamma, the frequency you were born with that made you the kind of learner and perceiver and recognizer that you were in the seasons when it was fully available. And the formation season, with its sustained pressure and its accumulated weight, has been pressing against that frequency with the kind of consistent intensity that produces suppression, not erasure. Suppression. And suppression can be reversed. Dr. Lake called his 7-minute track the genius song, not because it turns anyone into a genius, but because it restores access to the God-given neurological state that was already there. The state that allowed the natural you, the chosen one you, to think with that clarity and recognize with that sharpness and carry that intuition that the people around you could not fully explain. The genius song is not a meditation. It does not require practice or preparation or a specific mental state to enter. You put on your headphones and you listen for 7 minutes. And what the carefully engineered architecture of sound inside those 7 minutes does is bring your brain directly into gamma, not suggesting it, not encouraging it, entraining it. The way a tuning fork causes a string to vibrate at a specific frequency by proximity, the specific sound frequencies in the track bring the brain into gamma resonance directly, bypassing the months of practice that conventional approaches require. The research behind it comes from the institutions I mentioned: MIT, Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, and Berkeley. Scientists who have spent careers studying what happens to human cognition, creativity, and decision-making in gamma state. The results are consistent. Elevated gamma produces clarity that feels different from ordinary thinking, recognition that moves faster than linear analysis, decision-making that carries a quality of rightness that the chosen ones who have used it describe almost universally in the same language. Like my mind finally came back online. Like something that had gone quiet suddenly started speaking again. Like I could see the doors that were already there. Now I want to speak to something I know may be moving through your mind right now. I know you have tried things before. I know you have invested in tools and practices and approaches that carried real promise and produced real effort, and then delivered something less than what was hoped. I know what it feels like to bring a genuine hunger for change to something and then live through the distance between what was promised and what arrived. I am not asking you to set that history aside. I am asking you to hear one distinction. The approaches that did not produce what you hoped were almost certainly not targeting the right mechanism. Meditation, when practiced consistently over months and years, does eventually produce neurological changes that include increased gamma activity. But the pathway is slow, and it requires a level of sustained, consistent practice that most people in a formation season, managing the full weight of everything a formation season carries, simply cannot maintain. What Dr. Lake discovered was not a better version of those approaches. It was a different mechanism entirely. Brain entrainment does not ask the brain to gradually shift over time. It brings the brain directly into the target frequency through the specific sound architecture of the track itself. Not the same kind of tool with better marketing, a different category of tool with a different mechanism and a different timeline. 7 minutes, not 7 months, and 18,366 people have used it before you. Not as a statistic to impress you, as evidence of a pattern of response that is consistent enough across diverse people in diverse circumstances to indicate that the mechanism works in the way it was designed to work. The question is not whether gamma suppression is real. You have felt it. The question is not whether the approach can reverse it. The research and the people who have experienced it give consistent answers. The question is whether you are willing to find out. Now, here is something I want to say with full transparency, because you deserve to hear it clearly before you make any decision. To access the original Genius song with the complete brain entrainment technology properly embedded with the 4 bonuses Dr. Lake has included for people who receive this at this price, and with the full money-back guarantee that makes the decision essentially free of financial risk, the only place is the link in the description and the pinned comment of this video. The reason I am being this specific is important. There are audio tracks circulating under variations of the name Genius Song that do not contain the actual brain entrainment technology. They use the name, they use similar language, but they are standard audio files without the specific frequency architecture that does the neurological work. They will not produce gamma entrainment. They will not restore what the formation season suppressed. They are the appearance of the tool without the mechanism that makes it function. The only source for the original, with the full technology, the complete bonus materials, and the guaranteed protection that if you do not experience a difference you pay nothing, is the single link below this message. Do not search for it anywhere else, not on any platform, not through any third-party site. The link below is the only place where what I have described is actually what you receive. Let me tell you about the pricing, because I want to be fully transparent and I want the decision to be made with complete information. To access the kind of gamma activation Dr. Lake's technology produces through traditional neurofeedback therapy, the sessions are typically $300 each. The professional-grade biofeedback equipment for home use runs approximately $7,000, and that is not including the months of consistent sessions required to produce stable results. Dr. Lake compressed 34 years of that research into a 7-minute audio experience. The original price for it is $49, but for the people receiving this message, who Dr. Lake specifically recognizes as the audience this tool was built for, the people who have been in the formation season long enough to understand what gamma suppression actually feels like from the inside, it is available at $39, not as a temporary sale, as a specific decision Dr. Lake made about this audience. A price that does not exist on any other platform or through any other distribution channel. Only here, only through this link, only for you. And with that $39, you receive 4 additional materials at no extra cost. The first is a track designed for the developing minds of children, which activates the same gamma frequency in a format specifically calibrated for younger brains. The second is the original source book that inspired the film you likely know, provided in its original form, which deals with the principles of abundance in a way that the film adaptation only partially captured. The third is a guided visualization experience that takes you through a specific mental journey across the 4 areas of life: financial, relational, physical, and interior, that most directly correspond to the assignment of a chosen one. And the fourth is a visual summary of the 5 most significant daily practices for creating the conditions that allow a breakthrough season to land and sustain, formatted for printing and display. All of it for $39. And every dollar of it, if you do not experience what it promises to deliver, is returned to you, without condition, without requiring explanation, without limit on how many times you use the track before deciding. You are not risking $39. You are risking nothing except the cost of not finding out. Now, I want to address something directly. If you are someone who has already tried the things that promise to help you access this kind of clarity or shift, and they did not deliver what you hoped, I want to speak to that experience with honesty, rather than dismissing it. You were not wrong to try, and the fact that those things did not work is not evidence of a deficiency in you. It is evidence that they were not targeting the right mechanism. The practices that ask the mind to gradually shift over time are asking the chosen one, in the middle of the sustained pressure of a formation season, to do the additional work of slowly retraining a system that is already under significant strain. It is asking a person carrying a heavy load to also practice a discipline that requires a level of daily consistency that the heaviness itself makes difficult to maintain. Brain entrainment does not make that request. It does not ask you to do anything except listen. The mechanism is in the sound architecture itself. The brain responds to what it is exposed to, the same way it responds to the sound of rain and releases tension, or the sound of a voice you love and releases fear. It is not placebo. It is neurological response to specific frequency input. And the people who come to it after a long string of things that did not deliver, the seekers, as Dr. Lake called them, the ones who arrived, not because they believed, but because they had run out of things to lose, are often the ones who describe the most significant shifts. Because something about the posture of nothing left to lose is exactly the surrender depth that the readiness equation was pointing toward. You are not damaged by your disappointments. You are ready in a way that someone who has never been disappointed cannot be. And one more thing I want to say before I move into the declaration that this message has been building toward. The person you are in the process of becoming, the chosen one who has completed the formation, who has crossed the threshold, who carries the billionaire's blessing as a channel and not a container, has already made a decision about the things on their path that offer real support for the crossing. They did not wait for certainty. Because certainty about something you have not yet experienced is not available from this side of the threshold. They moved when it felt true, when something resonated in the place where all of the 7 signs have been resonating throughout this message, that interior compass that knows before the reasoning has finished working through its objections. The question is not whether you should. The question is how much longer you are willing to carry the weight of gamma suppression in the most important season of your formation. Because the threshold is close, the formation is nearly complete, the 5 movements are converging. And the door, when it arrives, will require the sharpness and the recognition and the clarity to see it and walk through it without the filter redirecting you away from it. The link is in the description and the pinned comment of this video. It is there for those who feel called to it, not as an obligation. As an invitation from a source that has taken 34 years of science and compressed it into 7 minutes, specifically for the chosen one who is standing exactly where you are standing right now, for those who feel called. The link is there. Now, let me close this space the way I told you I would, with a declaration, not a general one. A specific position declaration over your life, built from everything we have walked through together today, spoken over the exact person you are in this exact season. Stay with every word of what comes next. Because this is the part I told you hours ago when this journey began, was the reason this message was placed in front of you today. Before I speak the declaration this message has been building toward, I want to do something first. I want to bring you back to the beginning. Not because we need to revisit what has already been covered, but because the beginning looks completely different from where you are standing now. And I believe that when you see the 7 signs through the lens of everything we have walked through together, something final is going to settle in you that no amount of explanation could have produced before this moment. Because the truth we just arrived at changes the meaning of everything that preceded it. You are not just a recipient of the billionaire's blessing, you are the blessing itself. You are the channel. You are the vehicle through which provision moves toward the world that is waiting for what you carry. And now, let us look at the 7 signs one more time, with that understanding fully in place. Do you remember the first sign, the divine restlessness, the growing inability to settle for what used to feel like enough? I told you then that it was God-initiated, that He was relocating your peace from the current container to position your attention in the direction the blessing was coming from. But now I can tell you the full truth of what that restlessness actually was. It was the channel becoming aware of its assignment. A channel that is being built for a specific volume of water does not simply accept any size. Something in its structure, something in the integrity of its architecture, begins to resist configurations that are too small for what it was designed to carry. The restlessness you have been feeling is not impatience or ingratitude or spiritual immaturity. It is the architecture of your assignment pressing against the current container, communicating with quiet but consistent persistence that the purpose it was built for is larger than the space it is currently occupying. The restlessness was never about you wanting more for yourself. It was the assignment announcing its scope. The second sign, the quiet reorganization of the relationships around you. I described it then as God assembling the relational infrastructure of your next season. People being moved out, people arriving, both movements part of the same orchestration. Now hear it in full. The people who are arriving in your orbit are not simply allies for your personal breakthrough. They are the relational infrastructure of the blessing that is designed to flow through you. They carry specific pieces of what the assignment requires, connections to people who need what you carry, access to spaces where the provision is designed to go, gifts that complement the scope of what God is building through your life. And the people who have receded, the ones whose distance felt like loss, were not being removed from your life as a punishment or as a sign that something had failed. They were being honored in the most real sense by being released from a chapter of your story that was not designed for them, so that they could find their own chapter and you could enter yours with the people who were built for it. The relational reorganization was always the preparation of the channel's delivery infrastructure, not just your people, the people through whom the blessing flows outward. The third sign, the acceleration of ideas, the thoughts arriving that felt too large for your current circumstances. You now know what those ideas actually were. They were previews of the assignment, pictures of what the provision, when it arrives and flows through you, will be used to build. The scale of the ideas was never a measure of your ambition. It was a map of the scope of the need the blessing was designed to address. Those ideas have been arriving because the channel needs to know its destination before the provision fills it. A builder does not pour a foundation without first seeing the blueprint. The vision of what is to be built has to exist before the resources to build it are released. The oversized ideas were your blueprint, and the fact that they arrived with a quality of weight and specificity that felt different from ordinary imagination, that quality was the assignment's own confirmation that the picture was real and not the product of wishful thinking. Hold those ideas differently now. Not as things that feel too large for where you are, as blueprints for where you are going. The fourth sign, the compression, everything getting tighter, narrower, more pressured. At exactly the moment you expected things to begin expanding, I told you then that compression precedes expansion, that the fourth movement of God in the invisible realm was the final formation pressure, the most intense stage arriving just before the threshold. But now, hear what the compression was actually doing. A channel that has not been tested for pressure is a channel that cannot be trusted with volume. Before significant provision moves through any structure, the structure is tested. The integrity is verified. The capacity is confirmed. The compression was the structural test of the channel being built. Every day of that tightness was a day of the channel proving, under real conditions, that it would not collapse under what it was being built to carry. Every day you remained faithful, kept your character intact, maintained your grip on the source, continued to give from the little you had, and to believe in the scale of what was promised. Was a day the test was passed in real conditions, rather than in theoretical ones. The compression was not breaking you, it was confirming you. The fifth sign, the unexpected alignments, the small dismissible doors opening in areas you were not watching. Every one of those small doors is a seed from the second movement. Every connection forming in an unexpected place, every mild opening that appeared too small to be the breakthrough, was a piece of the infrastructure being assembled before the blessing arrives in full. Now you understand why those small things matter. Because the channel through which a billionaire's blessing flows does not appear suddenly from nothing. It is assembled, quietly, incrementally, piece by piece, in the season before the full volume arrives. The small alignments are the channel's assembly. You have been watching for the door, while God has been building the whole channel around you, and the channel is closer to complete than it has ever been. The sixth sign, financial clarity without financial change. The numbers the same, the circumstances the same on paper, but something sharpening in your thinking about resources, strategy, and possibility. You now know what that sharpening was. It was the stewardship architecture being built in advance of the provision that will fill it. God does not release a billionaire's blessing into a mind that has no framework for what to do with it. He builds the framework first, in the season before the provision arrives, so that when it lands, the channel is not just structurally sound, but navigationally ready. The financial clarity is the gamma of the assignment beginning to reassert itself. The specific God-given frequency of thinking and recognition that was built into you before the decline effect of the formation season pressed against it. It is returning, and as it returns, the thinking about provision is becoming what it was always designed to be: clear, strategic, purposeful, and oriented, not toward accumulation, but toward the flow. The sixth sign is the channel's navigational system coming online. And the seventh sign, the holy longing, the pull toward provision that feels like service rather than want, the desire for the resources the assignment requires that carries the weight of purpose rather than the texture of personal greed. I told you at the beginning that this was the sign that would recontextualize everything, and I told you it was the most frequently misread, suppressed, and shamed of all seven. Now you know its full meaning. The holy longing is the channel feeling the weight of the water that is designed to flow through it and pressing in the direction of the source. It is not greed, it is orientation. It is the assignment pulling itself toward the provision that was designed for it. And the reason it feels holy is because it is holy. It is God-initiated desire for God-purpose provision for God-designed assignment. The longing carries the fingerprint of the one who created it. And the chosen one who learns to honor this longing rather than suppress it, who stops making themselves small about it and begins carrying it as the compass it actually is the one who walks through the threshold without the filter redirecting them away from what is waiting on the other side. The seventh sign was always permission to want what God wants to give, at the full scale of what was promised, and not at the apologized-for version. Hold the longing. Do not reduce it. Do not qualify it into something socially acceptable. Let it point the direction it was designed to point. 7 signs, seen through the full understanding of what you are and what the blessing is designed to do through you. And now I want you to hear something that I believe is important for you to receive, not just as information, but as a genuine witness to what is happening in this season, across more lives than just your own. You are not alone in this crossing. Right now, in this exact season, there are chosen ones across the world who have been in the same formation, carrying the same 7 signs, arriving at the same threshold from the same direction of a long wilderness. They are in different countries, different circumstances, different specific shapes of waiting. But the same 5 movements are converging in their lives simultaneously with yours. The billionaire's blessing being released in this generation is not a solitary event happening in isolated lives. It is a coordinated release. God is preparing, simultaneously, across a generation of chosen ones who were each built for the assignments of this specific moment in history. The kind of provision that flows not just through individual channels, but through networks of channels, amplifying each other, connecting to each other, serving needs that no single channel could reach alone. The person receiving their breakthrough in a different country on the same day as yours is not competing with you. They are part of the same system of channels being activated in the same season for the same ultimate purpose. When your breakthrough arrives, theirs confirms it. When theirs arrives, yours is confirmed. You were never in this alone. And the company you are in, as you approach the threshold, is the most significant company of chosen ones assembled in your generation. You belong in it, and you belong at the full scale of what was promised. Now I want to give you something practical, something you can carry out of this message and apply beginning today, not tomorrow, not in some future season that feels more prepared. Today. Because the integration of what you have received is not something that happens passively. It is something you participate in. And the posture you carry in the next days and weeks of your life will either open the channel wider or allow the filter to quietly reassert itself now that the intense experience of this message has settled. I want to show you 3 specific daily practices, not disciplines that require significant time or effort. Posture shifts, interior orientations that, practiced consistently, maintain the openness of the channel and the clarity of the gamma that the formation season has been suppressing. The first practice is what I would call the morning sovereignty declaration. before the day fills with its noise and its demands and its measurements of what is present versus what was promised. There is a window in the first moments of waking when the interior is still relatively quiet and the day has not yet imposed its agenda on the mind. In that window, before you check anything, before you measure anything, before you do anything, say something to yourself in that interior place where the 7 signs have been resonating throughout this message. Say it without elaborate phrasing, without performance. Simply, in the quiet of your own interior. I am not the owner of what I carry. I am the steward of it. The provision I need for what I am here to do is not my responsibility to manufacture. It is the source's responsibility to release. My responsibility is to remain open. That is the practice. The sovereignty consciousness we described, the 5th and most important character trait, engaged not just in crisis or in prayer, but as the first orientation of every day. It takes less than a minute. And what it does, over time, is train the interior away from the striving posture that the formation season can produce, and back toward the receiving posture that allows the channel to function the way it was designed to function. The chosen one, who begins each day from a position of open-handed trust rather than white-knuckled management, is the one who recognizes the Wednesday afternoon conversation when it arrives. Because they are not so fixated on the door they have been watching that they miss the door God has quietly unlocked behind them. The second practice is what I want to call the during-the-day recognition discipline. This is the practice of treating the small alignments of each day as potential seeds from the second movement rather than as random occurrences. Not every conversation is a divine appointment. Not every connection is the hinge. I want to be careful not to create a framework that turns everything into a sign and exhausts the chosen one with constant interpretation. But there is a practice that is sustainable and specific and that takes no time at all. It is simply the practice of pausing once each day at any moment that carries a faint quality of unexpectedness. A conversation that turned in an unforeseen direction. A person who appeared in a context where they were not anticipated. An idea that arrived without invitation. An opportunity that surfaced in a place you were not looking. And asking, not anxiously, not urgently, with genuine curiosity, could this be a seed? That question, asked without the pressure of needing an immediate answer, keeps the awareness calibrated to the second movement without exhausting itself in constant interpretation. The chosen one who is calibrated to recognize seeds will not miss the moment when a seed is the hinge. Once a day, one question, that is the entire practice. The third practice is what I call the evening archaeology of grace. This is the practice that works most directly against the third voice of unworthiness, the voice that reads the length of the season as evidence that God's provision is not prioritized toward you. Before sleep, not in an elaborate review, not in a journaling exercise that requires significant time, in a brief interior scan of the day, find one thing. One thing that was given to you today that you did not manufacture, did not earn through your own effort, and did not arrange through your own planning. It does not have to be large. The size is completely irrelevant to the practice. A conversation that arrived at the right moment. A thought that helped when you were stuck. A provision, even small, that appeared when you needed it. A kindness extended without explanation from a direction you did not anticipate. Find one thing each evening and hold it for a moment with the awareness this came from the source. Not from my management, not from my striving. From the source. This practice does something specific over time. It trains the evidence tracking system of the mind, the same system that the second voice of unworthiness has been using to accumulate evidence of absence, to accumulate instead evidence of presence. And as that evidence accumulates, the second voice loses the raw material it has been using to construct its case. You are not denying that the full breakthrough has not yet arrived. You are training the mind to register what has been arriving all along, consistently, daily, at whatever scale the season has allowed, while the larger release is being assembled in the invisible. The source has been present every day of this wilderness. The evening archaeology is how you make that presence undeniable. Now, alongside those three practices, I want to name three things I am asking you to stop. Not to add to your discipline, to remove from it. Because some of what is currently costing you the most energy in this season is not something that needs to be done differently. It needs to simply stop. The first thing I am asking you to stop is timeline comparison. I said this when I named the self-sabotage behaviors, but I want to say it one more time in this context, because the integration of this message will be undermined if this behavior continues unchecked. There is someone in your life, or in your awareness, or on a platform somewhere, whose breakthrough arrived earlier and more visibly than yours. And something in you has been using that person's timeline as the measurement for whether yours is on track. I need you to hear this directly. That person's timeline is not your timeline. It was never your timeline. And measuring your formation against their outcome is like measuring the depth of a well by the height of a different building. The measurements do not reference the same reality. Their breakthrough was timed to the readiness of their channel. Yours will be timed to the readiness of yours. And the depth of your channel, the specificity of your formation, the scope of the assignment being prepared, may require a length of building that exceeds theirs, precisely because what flows through yours reaches further. The longest formation produces the most durable channel. Stop comparing your formation to someone else's outcome. They are not the same thing. The second thing I am asking you to stop is the minimizing of the signs. You now have the full context for all seven. You know what each one means. You know the filter that has been reinterpreting each confirmation into evidence of inadequacy. And now that you see both the signs and the filter clearly, you have a choice each time a sign presents itself. You can allow the filter to process it in the direction it has always processed incoming confirmation. Or you can hold it before it reaches the filter and ask what it actually is. I am not asking you to manufacture positive interpretation for things that genuinely carry no meaning. I am asking you to stop allowing the reflex of the unworthiness architecture to be the first and final word on what is arriving in your life. The seven signs we walk through are real. They are active in your life. And every time one of them surfaces, in any of its forms, it deserves a moment of genuine recognition before the filter gets access to it. You have been surrounded by confirmation this entire season. Stop letting the filter tell you the confirmation isn't there. The third thing I am asking you to stop is the scale apology. This is the practice of qualifying what you believe is coming so that it is socially and spiritually comfortable for the people around you to hear. There is a place for humility about the source of the blessing, the humility that says, I do not receive this because of my own merit. I receive it because of what God has placed on my life and what His purpose requires. That humility is genuine and necessary and is the very core of sovereignty consciousness. But there is no place for apology about the scale of the promise. God did not give you a billionaire's promise and then instruct you to reduce it in the telling until it was palatable to those whose faith does not currently reach that far. He gave it at the scale. He gave it because that is the scale the assignment requires. When you speak about what is coming, speak it at the scale at which it was given. Not with arrogance, not as a performance of confidence. With the settled, open-handed, grounded certainty of a person who knows they are not the source of what they are receiving, but who also knows they are not authorized to diminish what the source has declared. You are a channel through which a billionaire's blessing flows toward a world that needs it. Channels do not apologize for their capacity, they stay open. And now the final thing I want to place in your hands before this message crosses into its most sacred space. It is the truth about how this blessing comes to you. Throughout this message, we have spoken about receiving the billionaire's blessing. And I want to make sure you understand, at the deepest level, the relationship between you and this blessing, you do not earn it. An inheritance is not earned. An inheritance is received by someone who, through the natural process of time and relationship and preparation, reaches the moment of coming of age. The one who left the inheritance did not require perfect performance from the recipient. They required presence, faithfulness, showing up to the relationship through every chapter, even the hard ones. Remaining in the family, even when remaining was difficult. And when the right moment arrived, when the preparation was complete, and the recipient had reached the maturity that the inheritance required, the release happened not because the recipient had accumulated enough merit to qualify, but because the time had come, because the relationship was real, because the family bond held. You are not striving your way into the billionaire's blessing. You are inheriting your way into it. The wilderness was not a merit test. It was a maturity process, and maturity is not achieved. It is grown into, gradually, through every season of forming, through every layer of the 5 traits being built, through every day of maintaining the relationship with the source, even when the source seemed silent. You have been in the family all along, and the inheritance has always been yours. It was never a matter of whether you would receive it. It was always a matter of when the maturity arrived to carry it. And from everything we have walked through together today, from the 7 signs and the 5 movements and the formation of the 5 traits and the depth of the readiness equation, I can tell you this: the maturity is here, the inheritance is ready. And the God who placed your name in the covenant of this promise is not a God who forgets what he declared. He is the God who watches the channel he has been building with patience and with love, and with the unshakable certainty that what he designed will be completed exactly as he intended. He has not forgotten what he said to you, and the time of its fulfillment is not as far as the season has made it feel. Remember what I showed you at the very beginning of this journey. 7 signs, 7 specific markers already active in your life, pointing towards something already in motion in the invisible realm. Every one of those signs looks different now, seen through the fullness of what we have walked through together. The restlessness, the reorganization, the ideas, the compression, the alignments, the clarity, the longing. Not evidence of a difficult season. Evidence of a channel being built for a purpose larger than personal comfort. Evidence of a God who has never taken his hand off the work he began in you. Evidence that you are exactly where the story requires you to be. In the exact season the formation requires, approaching the exact threshold, the 5th movement has been assembling. Stay with that. And now let us enter the space this entire journey has been pointing toward. The declaration, the specific, positioned word-by-word declaration over your life that the closing of this message holds. I told you hours ago that there was a reason this message was placed in front of you today. I told you to stay all the way through because what was waiting at the end was not a general encouragement. It was something prepared for this exact moment in your story. We are at that moment now. Receive what comes next. Not as words on a screen, as something spoken directly over the person you actually are, in the season you are actually in, with the full authority of every truth this message has carried. God, we enter this space together, not as people who have merely listened to a message, as people who have walked through something real, something that has cost them something to carry, and who are standing now at the edge of a threshold that has been in view for a long time, waiting to be crossed. We enter this space with gratitude, not the surface kind, not the performed kind, the deep, specific, bone-level kind that only forms in a person who has been through enough of the wilderness to understand what it means when the wilderness begins to change. We are grateful for this specific season, not because it was easy. It was not because it was short. For many in this space today, it has been longer than they ever imagined when it began. But because in the economy of God, no season of genuine formation is wasted. Not one prayer that felt like it didn't land. Not one day of choosing faithfulness when faithfulness offered nothing back. Not one moment of holding the promise through the silence. Every part of it was working, and we are grateful to a God who did not take the shortcut with us, who did not release a blessing that our character could not carry, who was faithful enough to our assignment to build us thoroughly before he filled us completely. We are grateful for the process. We are grateful for the source who never left the room, even in the seasons when every sensory evidence suggested that the room was empty. We are grateful to be here, at this threshold, at this moment, together. And now I want to acknowledge something, because gratitude without acknowledgement of the real weight that was carried is incomplete, and you deserve to have the weight named before it is released. God sees what you have been carrying, not in the general sense, in the specific sense. He sees the exact texture of the particular way your wilderness arrived, the specific shape of the provision that did not come when it was prayed for, the particular quality of the silence that followed the declarations you made with genuine faith and then waited for, and waited for, and waited for. He sees the 2 moments, the ones you did not tell anyone about, the ones where the question surfaced that you have never said out loud, because saying it out loud would have felt like a betrayal of the faith you have been publicly representing. He sees the Tuesday afternoons that no one wrote about or celebrated, the ordinary, unremarkable days of simply continuing, simply showing up, simply refusing to let go, without any particular inspiration to keep going except the quiet, stubborn grip of a person who has decided that the promise is true even when the evidence is absent. He sees the times you gave from what you did not have, when the generosity came from a scarcity that was real, and you opened your hand anyway, not because you had surplus to spare, but because you understood, at least in that moment, that the source of the provision is not the amount currently in your hand. He sees the times you held the vision, when everything around you was saying that the vision was too large for the life you were actually living. He sees every single day of it, and he is not unmoved by what he sees. He is moved. He has been moved every day of this season, and what he has seen in you has not disappointed him. It has confirmed you. And now something needs to be released, not because carrying it was wrong, but because it was built for a season that is ending, and you cannot step fully into what is next while you are still carrying what belongs to what was. So I am going to name things, and as each one is named, I want you to simply let it go in whatever way feels honest for you, not dramatically, not with effort, just an interior releasing, an opening of the hand. The belief that a blessing of this scale is for someone who has done this better than you have. Release it. The habit of measuring your timeline against someone else's breakthrough and using the distance as evidence of something lacking in you. Release it. The interpretation of the length of your season as data that reflects how highly God prioritizes your specific situation relative to others. Release it. The 3 voices. The first voice that says, people like you don't receive this kind of blessing. The second voice that says, if God truly wanted to, he would have by now. The third voice that says the intensity of your longing for what was promised is evidence of something spiritually wrong with the wanting. Release them, all 3. Let the silence they leave behind simply be silence, and not fill it immediately with something else. Hold the quiet for a moment. The version of yourself that was shaped by the lack rather than by the calling, the identity constructed from what was absent rather than from what was placed in you before the absence began. Release it. The ceiling you installed above yourself in the season when no visible evidence arrived to hold the promise up. The ceiling that said this much is reasonable, this much is realistic, this much is what someone with my specific history and my specific failures and my specific shape of wilderness might legitimately hope for. Release it. And this last one is the most important. The apology for the size of what you believe is coming. Every time you have qualified the promise, every time you have reduced the declaration because the full scale of it felt too large to speak without embarrassment, every time you held the billionaire's promise at a safe, modest distance to protect yourself from the visibility of speaking something that large and then being seen waiting for it, let the apology go. The promise was given at the scale it was given because that is the scale the assignment requires. You are not authorized to reduce it. Release the apology. Now, something needs to be called forward, because releasing what was never meant to stay is only the first half of this moment. The second half is the activation of what was always meant to be here. So I speak now over you as a chosen one, as someone who was built for a specific assignment in this specific generation, and I call forward the full version of who you were created to be. I call forward the builder in you, the one who was designed to construct things that outlast a single lifetime, the one whose ideas arrive already carrying structure, already oriented toward the kind of outcome that serves people you have not yet met and changes circumstances that exist beyond your immediate reach. The builder in you is not a future version. It is the identity that the formation has been constructing this entire season. I call it forward now, into this moment, into the days and weeks and months that follow this one. I call forward the cycle breaker in you, the one through whom what has been repeated in your family and your generation for too long finally, permanently stops. The financial patterns that were carried before you, the ceilings that were accepted before you arrived, the quiet agreements with limitation that were made in seasons before your own, end with you. Not someday. Now, as of this moment, as of this declaration, the cycle ends where your breakthrough begins. I call forward the deliverer in you, the one who carries not just their own breakthrough, but the breakthrough of the people who are waiting on the other side of your provision. There are people in your sphere, people you know, and people you have not yet met, whose situation changes when yours changes, whose ceiling lifts when yours lifts, whose access to the resources and wisdom and opportunity they were designed for is gated in part through the channel your life is being built to be. The deliverer is activated now. The provision moves through you toward every person it was designed to reach. I call forward the light bearer in you, the one whose presence in a room, in a conversation, in a family, in a community, brings a quality of illumination that people cannot fully explain but consistently feel. The one who makes confusion become clarity and fear become direction, not through any technique or performance, but simply through the specific frequency God placed in this life. The light bearer does not shine for their own visibility. They shine because the space they are in needs what they carry, and the space that is waiting for you needs what you carry now. I call forward the bridge in you, the one who connects what has been separated, people who needed to find each other but could not without you in the middle, resources that existed in one place and needs that existed in another place and no connection between them until you arrived, communities that had no access to wisdom they required until a chosen one who spoke both their language and the language of kingdom economy stood between them and made the connection. You are the bridge, and the bridge is needed. All of this, every dimension of the identity that was being built during the formation, I call it forward now, into the life you are walking back into when this message closes, into the relationships that are being repositioned around you, into the opportunities that are already seeded and waiting for the gamma clarity of your recognition to identify them and move. Now, I want to cover what is being built, because breakthroughs of this scale are vulnerable in specific ways in the first season after they begin, and the protection of what God is releasing deserves to be specifically spoken over. what is being built in you and through you in this next season, I ask that it be guarded from the specific pattern of self-sabotage that tends to activate in chosen ones in the moment after the door opens. The pattern of finding the 5 plausible reasons to wait just a little longer. The pattern of receiving confirmation and then immediately doubting the reception. The pattern of the filter reasserting itself in the exact moment the breakthrough begins to be visible. Guard what is being built. Guard it from the premature exposure that collapses what has not yet had time to establish itself. The blessing that is being assembled does not need to be announced before it is stable. It does not need to be visible before it is real. It does not need the validation of anyone whose recognition is not yet calibrated to see what God has placed on your life. Build in secret for as long as the building requires. Guard the rising. And cover the people who are part of the channel's infrastructure. The ones arriving in relational positioning. The ones who carry pieces of the assignment's reach. Guard their connection to you and yours to them. And guard the clarity, the specific God-given gamma that will be required to recognize the door when it arrives and walk through it without the filter redirecting away from it. Protect the chosen one who is standing at this threshold, not from difficulty, from what would interrupt the completion of what has already been built. And now, this is the moment, the identity declaration, not as aspiration, as reality, as the settled, unshakable, open-handed truth of who you are in the economy of God and what is being released into your life in this season. Say this with me in whatever interior place you are speaking from right now. I am a chosen one, not a candidate, not a hopeful, not a person still in the process of qualifying. A chosen one, chosen before the wilderness, chosen through the wilderness, chosen coming out of the wilderness and into the season that the wilderness was always building toward. I am a builder. I build things that outlast me. The ideas that arrive in me are blueprints for real things that will be constructed through real provision in real time and will serve real people long after the building is complete. I am a cycle breaker. What was carried before me in patterns of limitation and financial ceiling and generational agreement with less than what God promised ends with me, not someday, today. This declaration is the line. Everything that follows it belongs to a different story than everything that preceded it. I am a deliverer. The provision moving through my life is not for my comfort only. It is for the people waiting on the other side of my breakthrough. I do not hoard it. I do not close around it. I receive it with open hands, and I release it in the direction of every need it was designed to address. I am a light bearer. The darkness in any room I enter has already met its disruption, not through force, through the specific frequency God placed in this life before the formation began and has been refining through every day of it since. I am the bridge. I connect what has been separated. I carry what neither side of the gap could carry alone. I stand in the space between the resource and the need, and I make the passage possible, and I receive the billionaire's blessing. Not someday, not eventually, not when the circumstances look more aligned or the external evidence becomes more convincing. Now, in this season, in this life, at the full scale of what was promised and not at the qualified, reduced, apologized for version of it. I receive it as a steward, with open hands, knowing that what I carry is not mine to keep, but mine to channel. I receive it as the builder, as the cycle breaker, as the deliverer, as the light bearer, as the bridge. I receive it as what God declared I am from before the formation began, a chosen one, and I am ready. It is done. It is sealed.